Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 261. Days of Development, 2. The night outside was dark when Seth returned to his Batcave with a new plan in mind. With some of Alzalsa's advice, he was sure that he would succeed. The first step was making the actual armor. Seth had 40 pieces of ice troll leather but only need 2 for the part of the armor. For the torso, he made a long brigandine using the untreated troll leather as a base and fixing hardened reinforced plates on top of it. A pair of streamlined pauldrons made of reinforced leather for the shoulders. The leg guards were also a mix of soft and hardened troll leather, just like the boots. Evie had a circlet similar to Seth's as headgear and he wanted to make her a pair of gauntlets separately. Aside from these, he finished a complete armor set from only leather. This came not without benefits as his sewing level up to leave 8 halfway through. As it was, the armor gave resistance to cold and an increased HP regeneration. But this was only the beginning. In the next step, Seth brought out the big soul that was dropped by the ice troll leader. This would be the centerpiece in this project. He followed the advice of the sorceress by creating the whole armor as a set similar to his wyvern set. This meant that he now stretched away sections of the soul to get a piece for every part of the armor. He proceeded to use soul forging to recreate a partial soul armament for the brigandine, the 2 pauldrons, 2 leg guards, and the pair of boots. He enchanted these soul armaments only with size adjustment to leave enough mana for the effects of the armor once it turned undead. After infusing these armaments and dipping them in the waters of Styx to affix the souls, he took a break and went to the cafeteria for a meal. There was a notification, but Seth was too tired to listen to it. The fatigue had caught up and hunger plagued him. The cafeteria was empty. This was not new. Since people started going to the dungeons, he met them less often. The kitchen was empty. This was weird. Mina's Mar, what time is it? 5 a.m., Master. Seth had totally lost his perception of time as he was crafting away on Evie's armor. Of course, everything was empty. Everyone was asleep in their beds. Seth returned to his workshop and gobbled up a bunch of rations from his inventory. Seth liked good food, but he was not a picky eater. He also drank a stamina potion to shoo the fatigue away. He wanted to finish the armor in one go. Looking at the armor, he found that the notification was about the synergy of the troll leather and the troll soul. This mix of a rare soul with its own rare material led to additional effects that were nothing to scoff at. But he was not done yet. Kept pumping 20 small and another 2 medium-sized troll souls into the set until the effects stopped increasing. Troll skin. Epic troll set 1/4. Epic. Physical.def, 985. Mag.def 405. Durability, 3100. 1 plus 120% health regeneration. 2 10% less damage from frost-related attacks. 3 plus 15% resistance to physical damage. 4 plus 27 strength. 5 plus 30 endurance. 6 armor will lose 30% more durability to fire-related attacks. 7 auto size adjustment. The brigandine part of an epic armor set by the hand of journeyman smith. Mysterious methods have strengthened the set that will bestow the wearer with the power of a true troll. Set effect. Skill, troll, you thought I was dead? You should have double tapped. Once a day the wearer won't die when the HP falls below 0. They will instantly regenerate 20% of their full health, but only when their head was not destroyed. The full troll set increased HP regen by 250% and lessened frost damage by 40%. These were already tremendous effects and would also fit as an armor for Jonah. But the one Seth had made for him was actually slightly better when it came to overall stats. Seth had created this armor as a set because of Al's advice. Although she had no experience with this kind of necromancy, having one soul connecting all parts would be more advantageous for turning into an undead than when it was 9 completely separate parts. Seeing the result as it was calmed his heart. Even if the attempt with the ballad failed, this was still a great armor set he could give Evie. But he could not give up to at least try. It was time to finally chant the ballad. Seth had a hard time deciphering the notes, but Al had helped him, and he was able to practice the song a little in the library and while making the armor. There was no effect without the chanting skill, so there was no problem with rehearsing it. How was he supposed to use it if he didn't have the chanting skill? Who needed demon chanting if they had the voice of a god of chaos? Voice of Seth was a divine skill. And coupled with Orpheus' voice, Seth was sure it would work out. Confidently Seth started the deep and fast chant of the Song of Unlife. His voice was drenched in a demonic charm and seduction thanks to voice of Seth. Somewhere in a different dimension, a half-rotten skeleton sitting on a throne of the cold dark stone in the center of a necropolis lifted its head. It had been a long time since someone sang for it. There were not many demons left with an interest in corpse puppets and the skill to move it. This song was different. He knew the text, but the performance was different from anything he had heard before. The singing was one of the best it had ever heard, but that was not the end. There was a special note in this voice. It conveyed intentions and feelings. It felt honest and pure and moved his heart. It didn't matter what these intentions were, they were backed by strong desire and skill. The demon felt almost compelled to help. The skeleton lifted its hand covered in dry flaky skin, and a stream of power followed the sound of the song to fulfill the musician's desires. Workshop. Shortly after Seth started singing, a ray of dark green unholy power bathed the armor set in front of him. The grey troll leather was drenched in energy. Slowly its color and aura changed. It turned into a shiny, almost wet-looking black with a sick green sheen. Just the look and aura could make the onlooker feel uncomfortable. Necrotic troll skin. Epic undead troll set 1/4. Undead armor. Epic. Physical.def, 1000. Mag.def 500. Health, 3100. 1 plus 120% health regeneration. 2 20% less damage from frost-related attacks. 3 plus 15% resistance to physical damage. 4 plus 30 strength. 5 plus 40 endurance. 6 armor will lose 30% more health to fire-related attacks. 7 auto size adjustment. 8 regenerates 5% health every 10 seconds. The brigandine part of an epic armor set by the hand of journeyman smith. Mysterious methods have strengthened the set that will bestow the wearer with the power of a true troll. Set effect. Skill, troll, you thought I was dead? You should have double tapped. Once a day the wearer won't die when the HP falls below 0. They will instantly regenerate 20% of their full health, but only when their head was not destroyed. Skill, the horde even dismembered, we stand united. Undead in the surroundings have a 15% increase in health, overall defense, and attack. Seth looked at the changes, blinking. It had worked and became even better than expected. Durability had turned into health and regenerated at an alarming rate if damage was taken. It was a shame that the weakness had increased, but the additional skill made it worth it. Now dying and becoming an undead came with a 15% boost in defense, attack, and health. Maybe Evie could take a necromancer class as a secondary class? It was closing in at 6 a.m. Seth put the finished armor on a stand and went back to his private quarters to sleep. He found Mina sleeping in his bed and snuggled up to her, immediately falling asleep. Chapter 262. Days of Development, 3. Seth had prepared enough merchandise for the store and decided to concentrate his efforts on his studies. The success in making the necrotic troll skin set showed him that he did not have to concentrate on just the crafting aspects taught at the Bard College. If he got a better idea of the demons and their history, he would not need the advice of others like Trith to know where else he could look for good effects. He also visited other courses like songwriting, poetry, and tried to learn how to read notes. In the following weeks, he left the store in the care of the administration. With the plans they made, it would take some time until the grand opening. Mary and Jane were busy finding employees and taking care of furnishing the shop. The Tower Master's only job in this was giving his approval on the budget and plans. Other than that, he spent his time either with Mina on her days off or at the college. In his pursuit for knowledge, he also got closer to Ember. She was mischievous and liked pranks but was trustworthy otherwise. She was also a total music nerd and a big help along the way in learning the more creative things. His singing skill had soon almost caught up to his sewing skill, becoming singing, beginner, leave 8. And not just the ordinary singing skill grew, but Orpheus' voice also reached leave 4. Another skill he managed to gain in his studies was rune mastery, which also reached leave 4 thanks to the combination of his universal translation and demon language, which had become adept leave 7 by now. Another Tower Master thing was meeting the new members the Lords brought in. Volko had called an old friend of his. Otto was a journeyman pharmacist. Although he lacked the attribute boost of the blessing, his skills were genuine. He also came across a promising healer from Delta. His name was Orion, or at least he called himself that. They got a contract from Mary and Seth handed them a sigil ring each. With this, the medical wing was staffed. Monique similarly found a healing mage specialized in water magic and a shaman that could heal and attack. They were brothers called Ray and Shay with levels in the mid-40s. They had been working as a duo until now and had proven their worth in the dungeon. After a few dives with them, Monique decided to get them on board. With the addition of these two, the crafters could finally concentrate on production. Allison and Evie were grinding potions while Link was cooking like there was no tomorrow. Seth didn't give Evie the new armor immediately. He wanted to make it an event and give every member their new gear when the time was right. It was not complete without a pair of gauntlets anyway. The new members were allowed to choose a few pieces from the items prepared for the store. His care did not stretch as far as to make personalized armor for the new guys, yet. But Seth did not just study and laze around. He also joined the two parties on a few trips to the dungeons. The 5 trips he joined were barely enough to help him level up to 44. Because the abilities of a bard needed a lot of memory, he used a part of his ability points to increase his int to 70 and distributed the rest on the other attributes. 3 weeks after choosing the location, the grand opening was finally announced. The store looked just like Seth had imagined. The lowest floor featured an assortment of uncommon armors and weapons. There were also some of the weaker rare items among them. Beside the armory was a separate counter that sold common and uncommon potions and similar products that Evie and Allison had crafted. They had made a breakthrough and ranked up their skill some time ago. They were currently grinding uncommon potions, but most of those were held back for the field service of Mina's march. The store mostly sold the stocked-up common merchandise. On the second floor were any kind of uncommon and rare accessories and the rare armaments like the blood drinker weapons Seth had brought from Aura. Seth had decided to sell them since he could make much better ones now if needed. And they could be a great advertisement. The third floor was a restaurant that served Link's cuisine. The gourmet hunter's cooking had already reached the taste of fine dining. The prices charged seemed astronomical at first, but considering that many of his dishes were able to increase the stats of people below a certain threshold, they were appropriate. Only a few restaurants had started selling such foods in Delta, yet. This kind of food not only needed a high cooking skill, but also a vast knowledge of ingredients and their powers. And who could have better knowledge in that, than a gourmet hunter? But the hunter had not just improved in the kitchen. It became apparent during the few times Seth and Link had entered the dungeon together recently. Since Link was able to concentrate on cooking and eating, his own stats had tremendously increased, and he had also inherited some peculiar skills from the ingredients. Skills like Poison Claw and Tough Skin. The hunter had a hard time using Poison Claw in a fight, but Tough Skin was a good skill to increase defense for a short time. The only thing Seth was not quite sure about was the name. Above the entrance was a big sign displaying the name, the Turquoise Anvil. He had not chosen the name, but he understood where they were coming from. Jane seemed very proud of the name, so Seth simply accepted it. There had been quite a bit of promotion going on for the last 3 weeks and a crowd of adventurers had assembled in front of the entrance. The VIP of the opening was Lena. Finn had passive-aggressively pressured her into it, and now a princess of the Krana Empire was opening their store. This lured in not just people of Delta but also demons and people of the Empire. Then without further ado, I shall open this. I won't accept it, a whiny scream came from among the crowd. You. Time and time again I told you that I won't accept this kind of store here, a man with a slim figure and long curly hair closed in on Jane, swinging an accusing pointer. His brown mane swung around wildly as he gesticulated like a conductor. I don't want to have a shop with those ugly armors and weapons in the vicinity of my outlet. One had to mention here, that Seth's products followed the dwarven principles. His products followed a traditional design that put effectivity above anything else. The blacksmiths of Delta had an inclination to make fantasy armors and weapons. As such, Seth's weapons were very conservative in comparison. The raging maniac was the designer Nico Booz, the crazy cook who started the superhero suit trend. Seth had stepped over his shadow and opened his store beside this man's crazy store, and it totally freaked the other out. Perfect. He felt a lot better with his choice of location. He couldn't help but grin from ear to ear. I will open this shop. The princess ignored the raving lunatic and officially opened their store. The crowd flowed into the store. No. Nico kneeled as if a searing arrow hit his very soul. Seth couldn't help but burst out in laughter. Why are you laughing, you cretin? Couldn't help myself. This is hilarious. Do you know who I am? I do. It makes this even better. But do you know who I am? Some nobody taking joy in a celebrity's anguish. Some nobody responsible for the celebrity's anguish, he said, laughing, and entered his shop. Wait, what? The man exclaimed and followed suit. Chapter 263. Nico Booz. What did you mean? The lanky man rushed into the store following Seth. With a roguish smile, he indicated for Nico to follow him to the second floor. The second story was only for people who had the needed cash to buy things from this place. There were only a few people present right now. Nico only saw the silhouette of Seth vanishing on the stairs and followed him to the third floor. Seth sat at one of the tables and talked to the waiter, ordering food. "What did you mean just now?" the effeminate man repeated his question. "Calm down. Have a seat," Seth said with an amicable smile. The driven and confused look in Nico's face lifted his mood a little. The other was even more appalled by traditional armor than Seth was with superhero suits. "How many people do you think are allowed up here right after opening?" Seth continued after Booz sat on. The tailor only shook his head confused. "Only me and my friends." "So, take a guess. Who do you suppose am I?" Nico's eyes widened, and the shock turned into fury. "So you are the Philistine who dared to put this blemish in front of this one's eyes. I think you used that word wrong, but yet. Great to finally meet you. I'm Seth Smith. I made most of the merchandise in this place and am somewhat of the owner," Seth said with glee and grabbed one of Nico's wildly gesticulating hands to shake it. "Don't touch me," he screamed and pulled away his hand. Now. No need to be impolite. I'm also not very enthusiastic about someone propagating something like superhero suits. I still decided to tolerate your business and open my shop here. In God's name, why? Just to spite my art. Why? Of course, to greater my profit. You can't expect adventurers to go and fight monsters in pajamas. One can always equip a suit of armor on top of such a skin-tight suit of embarrassment. Spiting you was just a happy little accident. Embarrassment? How dare you call my creations embarrassing? I have never heard anyone complain about my merchandise. I mean, it really takes a special kind of people to enjoy having their junk presented as a prime target to any dungeon mob." Nico quietened down and his face turned burning red at Seth's filthy comment. "All I am trying to say is that we are not enemies, despite our differences in aesthetics. On the contrary. We could be allies." "Allies?" the tailor asked suspiciously. "Of course, allies. It isn't like we offer fundamentally competing products," Seth said with a tinge of bewitching charm swinging in his voice. "What do you mean?" the tailor asked confidently, but his eyes shifted away. He had realized it himself. Nico Booz was a spell weaver, a unique class which mixed the skill of a tailor with those of a magician and an enchanter. Usually, one would associate a spell weaver with a great magician who can weave many different spells to gain a greater effect. Contrary to this, Nico Booz could learn magic and turn spells into threads to weave fabrics. Depending on the tailor's skill level and the compatibility of the magic, he could make items with up to 3 effects that could be activated by supplying mana into the item. This was a tremendous achievement for a cloth armor. But it came with drawbacks. Magic thread had a dismal durability and offered hardly as much protection as a common cloth armor. As such, he had to incorporate other materials like leathers and threads into his suits to increase these two aspects at the cost of the magic effects. But it was simply not enough. In the beginning, his suits were just fine, but now that the level of people rose, the trend was slowly dying. Adventurers had already started wearing armor on top of his creations. A half-assed armor could simply not cut it on the higher levels in a dungeon. Being directly confronted like this, the tailor had to admit that his business had slowed down lately. As the founder, he was the first to feel his empire crumbling, even though the trend was still doing somewhat okay. "We can work together. We can prosper together. What do you say?" The charming voice was lingering in the tailor's ears, telling him to grab this hand. Assuring him this was the right thing to do. If he didn't want to become a side note in history, he needed to take this hand. Seth's magic-laden voice did its best to crumble the tailor's aesthetic beliefs and make him susceptible to the idea of making part of an armor set and let off the idea of superhero suits. Finally, hands were shaken. But the tailor was not beaten. "Just wait. Once my skills have grown, I will show the world the greatness of skin-tight spandex suits once again. You cheeky little just wait. I will show you the true power of armor." Their hands were bound in a strong handshake where they tried to crush each other's hands. Seth had an incredible advantage as a blacksmith, but he showed respect and held back from breaking the other man's hands. They had come to an agreement. While the store below them was filled with all kinds of adventurers who were just looking, window shopping, or stocking up for the next dungeon dive, there sat 2 men with a unique class on the highest floor and had a meal together. A good meal helped smoothen their differences, and they soon were entangled in an enthusiastic conversation about armor and their future cooperation. After Nico came to terms with the thought that his products would be part of a bigger setup, he actively spoke about possible ways to link their two businesses. Seth had felt a little bad to have used voice of Seth, but it seemed that he had not brainwashed the man, but just helped him to see reality for what it was. One thing they came up with was that the tailor would start offering traditional cloth armor and clothing that could be worn below a regular plate armor or chain mail. This came with the benefit that Nico did not have to worry about the durability or defense of these items. They could be worn for the effects, while the armor could take care of defense. And Nico could then send these people to the turquoise anvil. If they had enough money to buy items from Nico Booz, they could directly enter the second floor. Seth too was interested in these items of Nico Booz. Although he could not rival Nadal's skill as a tailor yet, his abilities as a unique class were quite tempting. Especially with Seth infused a soul into these clothes, making their effects permanent. They would make for a great addition to the gear of his people and maybe even his own. After a good meal, Seth had a new business partner. He would leave the later interactions to Jane since he had other things to do. He had soaked up quite a lot of knowledge. It was time to make the Lord armors and maybe even more. He had always been worried about just grinding out heaps of epic-rated items. He couldn't just sell them to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Together with Elle, he might have found a solution for his lacking trust in humanity. However, there was still a lot to do before that day came. Chapter 264. The future is now. Delta. Hey James, did you see these flyers? His good friend Jess showed him a piece of paper. He had seen similar ones everywhere in the city but didn't bother to read. Wasn't it just some stupid advertisement again? Isn't it just another scam? Last time it was a scam about health potions with an 18% higher effectivity, and before that was jewelry that claimed to heal all diseases. These trashy scams would surface occasionally. Since Delta had calmed down, all kinds of snake oilers and scammers had found their way into the city. The Empire's supervision had taken a dive after the princess and a lot of the forces had left for new frontiers. From what common people like them heard, the Empire was increasing their territory eastward. James could think of a few reasons. West of Delta's mountain range was only barren land and desert. There was also the Lambda district. They were still unable to contact Lambda, people that traveled to the east simply vanished. Who would want to conquer a desert? But James had his own conjectures. Lately, there had been many cases of people going missing in the city, and there were rumors about Zarkists having infiltrated Delta. If someone, like him, added one and one together, then the Empire was going on an offensive against the followers of Zarkin who had their territory somewhere in the east near Gamma. This one is different. It's from Mina's Mar. Jess interrupted his thoughts. So what? Didn't you hear about them? It's a guild that has been recently gaining traction. Their 2 dungeon parties are around Leave 60 and rumor says they are decked out in epic gear. Full sets of epic gear? Who's supposed to believe that? One of their parties worked as the bodyguards of the princess. You think they will lie? Okay. Let's say it's true. What about this flyer? They are looking for people of their Minas Mars Oath Guard. The examinations start next week. If you manage to get in, you are lent a full epic set for the duration of your service. We should join. Why? You only have to be between Leave 25 and Leave 40 to register for the exams. It's worth a try. They offer board and lodge. Also, a monthly wage of 5 gold and bonuses on materials harvested. If we get in, we wouldn't have to worry about our finances anymore. James looked at her sparkling eyes with doubt. She was always so easily sold on things. She had always been like this. And he couldn't talk her out of it. All he could do was join her and make sure she was not scammed too hard. James was a warrior and off-tank. He took the hits for Jess, who was a lightning mage. They were among the people who managed better after the apocalypse than during the civilized age. They were not doing great, but they managed to survive as adventurers without a stable party. He was Leave 34 and Jess Leave 36. They had been almost living in the dungeons ever since the Adventurer Guild made it possible to make a stable income with it. He warmed up to Jess's idea when he thought back to the hard times. Especially in the beginning, when they could only use something like starter equipment. The fights were terribly hard, and they would often get hurt. They had no healer and potions were expensive. What little money they made from the materials they managed to loot from monsters was often sucked up by the expenses to replenish potions and rations. It had taken a long time until they could even afford to get better common equipment. Maybe they could really. But there was no guarantee they would take them. James was sure that they had a good amount of actual experience in the dungeon, but who didn't? Okay, I think it's worth a try, he finally agreed with his childhood friend. It was still a week until the exams. This means that today was still daily routine of visiting the dungeons to buy a meal. Minar. Seth was working on the last set of oath armor. He had worked a lot in the last 3 months to complete the concept of the oath armor and had been grinding them a lot. But he had not only spent his time in the smithy. He had recently reached level 50 and unlocked the privilege to choose a second class. Today he would visit the church and choose a second class. Seth was not the only one who had grown. He was actually the last one to reach level 50. Tekker, Monique, and Jonah had even crossed level 60 after spending day and night in the dungeons. Mina and the others were able to fully join Minar after the princess left Delta. The farewell was accompanied by a lot of royal tears when she had to separate from Finn. They kept the buff and were all equivalent to level 65. It had been clear to him for some time, but now that he reached level 50, he planned to take Demon Bard as a second class. Currently, the skills he had gained at the Bard College were all secondary skills and as such weakened. Because of this, he had concentrated on making the oath armors instead of completely upgrading the Lords of Mina's March. The oath armor was the name for the combination of ballad and inscription Seth and Alzalsa came up with. Studying the diverse text in the college's library, he had found a way to even manipulate souls. Seth should have known that dealing with demons also meant dealing with souls. They had found a way for 2 souls to make a contract, an oath. Together with a ballad, and the skill crafty failsafe level 6, they were able to create a unique effect. Similar to the ballad that bound an item to the user once it was worn, these armors could be bound through an oath. A soul oath could be anything between 2 sentient souls, but the capacity was a lot lower when it came to these incomplete souls Seth had. The soul oath was sworn onto the armor with an infused soul, and a pact was made that allowed the wearer to use the armor as long as they were affiliated with Minar and not do anything to harm the organization. The effect of crafty failsafe, which had leveled up from his constant grinding, enabled Seth to imbue the soul he infused with an enchantment that made it impossible to use the items against a member of Mina's March. It was a two-way security that would hinder people from using these items against him or abuse them in their name. This could be applied to any kind of armor or weapon. On that note, he started using the skills effect on all epic and rare weapons they started selling in the shop. The deeper he delved into the skills of a demon bard, the more he had wanted to wait until he gained the class to upgrade the gear of his people. Tekker, Jonah, and the others were already wearing epic-rated armors when he arrived in Delta. Yule Cat's Fur was currently wearing the prototypes of the oath armors until Seth could make them their personalized armors. He had caved in and gave Evie the necrotic troll skin when it became clear that he would take some time to make them the best armor possible. After 3 months of grinding, all of Seth's skills had shown tremendous growth. Enchantment, Journeyman, and Blacksmith, Journeyman, had both reached LV7 while Goldsmith, Journeyman, had reached level 6. When Soul Forging reached level 4 recently, it gained the perk that the soul armaments would have part of the effects the soul would bestow onto an item. Another change was that Spirit Smithy gained an etching table when he reached level 45. It was a normal etching table that was meant for decorative etching and not the inscriptions, but he could still use it in this way. In general, most of his skills had gained 1 or 2 levels. His increased character and skill level had unlocked a few of the Olympian enchantments. They were 5 engravings that resembled sigils. Their effects were strong but rather common, so they were probably some of the easiest to make. One unique thing about these enchantments was that they were strong but literally unique. He could not enchant 2 items with the same enchantment. If he wanted to enchant another item with these sigils, he needed to destroy the current one. When he finally finished the last piece of the last oath armor, he got himself a good meal to get ready for his visit to the church. Chapter 265. New Class. Delta. Are you sure he's here? Yeah, I had someone observe the church in case he leave it alone, slurp. Hig. He hasn't left the church alone in 3 months, what's different? Now we have an army Gahurg hi. Imagine what we can do with them after capturing that cat girl and the spear girl. Ho ho ho, oh god, just what is happening to me? Get a grip. You can't succumb at such an important moment. Yeah, you are right. Today is the day. Seth is finally getting a second class. Finn asked excitedly like a proud mother watching her child graduate. This was Seth's first time that he entered the church's classroom. It was the place where people came to change their class or get their second one. No need to be nervous. The room will show you your options. You just have to choose what you want. Simon calmed him down. Seth nodded and stepped into the room of complete darkness. Ding! Player. You have reached level 50 and gained the privilege to choose a second class. Look at your options and choose. Names of classes appeared in the darkness. White glowing letters were floating in the air. Seth had expected a lot of options because of his diverse set of skills, but there were only 4. He didn't even get a job wheel. Unlike what Seth had heard from the others, these jobs each had a short description. The first job floating to the left of Seth was called Elementalist. An epic class that would give him similar skills to pyrokinesis and allows him to bend the 4 natural elements. This sounded really cool and extremely powerful. This could really give him a great boost in combat. Although this job was very tempting, it was not what he was looking for. He decided to give the other options a chance. To the right of it was a job called Engineer of Death. A unique job that combined Seth's current abilities with necromancy to create something like undead automatons. It reminded Seth of how Jiangshi were constructed and enhanced undead in some games and novels. Did he see such a job because of what he did with Evie and her armor? This was a big no. Except for the fact that Seth had absolutely no intention to play with corpses, he could do that already if he really wanted to. Second, to last was a job called Divine Armorer. An epic class that would strengthen all blacksmith-related skills and add skills for the production of golems and automatons. Seth didn't like this one. It was technically just an upgrade to his current class but brought nothing new to the table. It could just save him some time from grinding, but in the end, everything had a limit. The class would become technically useless once he reached the peak in his blacksmith skills. The others at least gave a greater variety of skills that could help him surpass what a blacksmith could do. The last option was called Infernal Skald. A unique variation of the Bard class that did not just encompass the class of Demon Bard and its different variations, but also came with a demon's skills to use souls in different ways. This one was along the line of jobs he had expected. It could strengthen his current abilities and add some more offensive skills than he currently had. Compared to the other, this was actually the tastiest for Seth. The more options he had, the more interesting stuff he could make. It wouldn't get boring anytime soon. It would also help a lot once he started making the armors for the lords and his own. Seth was sold. Ding! You have chosen Infernal Skald as a second class. Ding! New skills have been added to your skill window. Ding! He got several notifications on new skills and skills that had changed. For example, his singing, which had reached Adept Level 2 as a secondary skill, was recalibrated to Apprentice Level 1 as the skill became a primary one. Surprisingly enough, some of his original class skills also gained a level. Spirit Capture and Soul Forging each gained a level. Other skills like Demon Chanting were integrated with Voice of Seth. He also gained new skills like songwriting, poetry and instrument mastery. With the passive skill Channeling, he could open a better connection to beings on other planes, increasing the effect of songs that drew on their power. The most interesting skill he got was Soul Trade. From a quick glance, it seemed that he could use souls to bargain with demons to increase the effectiveness of the songs and ballads. The changes were not just limited to the skills. He also got a boost in attributes. His personality and luck and gained a big buff. Some of his modifiers also changed, with the most significant being mana. Instead of 10 mana per 1 point in intelligence, he now got 30, similar to a caster class. Seth now understood the kind of boost a second class could give. It was no wonder that there was a special exam to become a B-rank adventurer. He had held himself back from testing the skills since he wanted to save resources. Except making the oath armors, he had kept piling up good materials from the auction house. Now he felt that it was the time to use them. In front of the church. He's leaving the building. Tell everyone to get ready. When the cat girl, the tower thief, the fairy, and the old priest stepped out onto the street, they moved. In a second, a group of almost 200 humanoids in various states of transformation appeared. They filled the streets. Ha ha ha! Today we will have our revenge. Nobody can offend the Willis family and get away with it. The crowd cackled as if they had heard a hilarious joke. Spittle and sob ran from their mouths as they laughed and growled like beasts. Unbound desires running rampant in their gaze. Today they could kill. They held back for so long. Spreading their belief in the darkness. Making people join and see the greatness of their god Zarkan. Immortality. Power. Today they would make an example and wipe out the leader of Mina's Mar to establish themselves in the city. They would get their revenge for burning their home. They would get their revenge for stealing their heritage. They would get. In ultimate excitement, the brains of the Zarkists stopped working and like beasts, they roared. The Willis family? Their church? They just wanted blood. They wanted to finally rampage. Yes. The fear in the priest's eyes. The hesitation on the cat girl's face. Even the disgust of the little fairy. This was what they thrived for. It was the height of their existence, only second to unleashing their darkest desires on these victims. But why did the prey smile? What was with the glint in the thief's eyes? A deep tone vibrated through the vicinity and a rhythmic chant joined into the deep humming. Dusa vibrace ija, a shout blasted past the beasts, and it felt as if they were hit by a wall of air. Their breath stalked as the air was pressed out of their lungs and they were unable to breathe. The sound, the hum Dusa Ugras ti. Like a soothing voice, the void was calling them. An overpowering tiredness made them unable to move as their whole body felt weighed down. Gone were the desires, the excitement. There was only the sweet call of the void inviting them for a long sleep. When was the last time they slept? Yes, sleep. Almost all Zarkists in the surrounding fell to the ground like puppets that had their strings cut. Only a few that were the farthest away from the center were able to escape the call of the void and flee for their life. What a great harvest! What was that? Seth, what did you do? Simon looked at the young man in shock. He had recognized them as Zarkists and couldn't believe they just fell like flies. What do you mean? I tried my new skills. He said with his eyes glued to the growing number in his soul space. Okay, but what did you do to them? I thought Zarkists are immortal. Mina also asked. She had also recognized the threat. Finn was uncommonly silent. She was just staring at Seth with sparkling eyes like an idol. To her it was like she had commanded them to die, and they just fell over. Seth only came back to the moment after the number of uncommon medium-sized harvested souls stopped at 210. Oh, what? The Zarkists? Short story, I'm their weakness. I came across a poem that could be roughly translated to soul shock. I had to think of these guys when I found it, so I learned it. Simona and Mina looked at him in shock. It prompted Seth to further explain. A normal person would only be stunned for a short time. But after using spirit capture together with the poem and increasing its power with soul trade, this was what happened. The soul shock was strong enough to break the chains of Zarkan that bound the souls to the mortal plane. The rest was done by spirit capture, which promptly collected all the freed souls, leading to the deaths of every Zarkist in the vicinity. Seeing how effective it was on the followers of Zarkan, Seth felt like going to an undead dungeon to harvest souls. His spirit capture had just upgraded due to the job change, but after collecting 200 uncommon souls it felt like he was close to the next level up. Seth looked around, seeing the corpses dissolving into a dark necrotic slime. Who's going to mop up this mess? Not me. Finn, not me. Mina, not me. Simon, not he sighed. Okay. Yet. Make the old priest mop up the goopy black residue of religious fanatics. Sure. Since I didn't feel it like it fit in the chapter, I'm putting it at the end. Name, Seth Smith. Mark of Ivisor. Olympian myths. Blessing, Hades, Hephaestus, Seth. Title, Faster Than the Thought. Level, 50. EXP, 35%. Race, Orihuma. Sex, male. Age 24. Class, Spirit Blacksmith, Unique, / Infernal Scald, Unique. Affiliation, System Church, Minar. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 2600. Strength 140. Dexterity 130. Agility, 89. Intelligence 85. Willpower 120. Endurance 122. Personality, 73, 43 plus 30. Luck 50, 35 plus 15. Free AP, Attribute points 7. Free SP, Skill points 0. Defense. Physical, 450, 366 plus 50 plus 44, ENDX 3. Magical, 283, 240 plus 25 plus 18, WILX 2. Fire immunity. Earth resistance, 54%. Wind resistance, 11%. Water resistance, 9%. Poison resistance, 20%. Frost resistance, 7%. Resistance to mind attacks, 6%. 22% resistance to diseases. Skill window. Blacksmith, Journeyman, Leave 7, 33%. Enchantment, Journeyman, LV7, 27.7%. Goldsmith, Journeyman, Leave 6, 97.9%. Blacksmith size Leave 5. Blueprint, Journeyman, Leave 4. Reinforce, Journeyman, Leave 4. Energy Circulation, 2, Leave 4. Crafty Failsafe Leave 6. Superior Mining Leave 5. Mineral Detection Leave 5. Sewing, Beginner, Leave 9, 35%. Soul Trade Leave 1. Soul Infusion Leave 4. Spirit Smithy Leave 5. Spirit Capture Leave 6. Spirit Forging, Journeyman, Leave 5. Orpheus Voice, Passive, Leave 5. Channeling, Passive, Leave 1. Voice of Seth Leave 2. Rune Mastery Leave 5. Singing, Apprentice, LV1. Songwriting, Beginner, Leave 1. Poetry, Beginner, Leave 1. Instrument Mastery, Beginner, Leave 1. Weapon Mastery, Expert, Leave 7, 25%. Lame One's Walk Leave 5. Calm Reaction, Passive, Leave 7. Fear Resistance, Passive, Leave 8. Poison Resistance, Passive, Leave 4. Earth Affinity Leave 5. Fire Affection, Passive, Leave 8. Pyrokinesis, Ability, Leave 6. Map Leave 4. Observation Leave 6. Concealment Leave 4. Universal Translation Leave Max. Demon Language, Adept, LV 8. Compulsive Precognition, Ability. Lifestyle Magic Leave Max. Chapter 266. Cheater. This was your doing, Seth, the bearded god said angrily. Hephaestus was cranky because Seth had not chosen the class he had offered. The three gods were currently sitting in the little cinema dimension and watched the highlights of Seth's life. I have no idea what you are even talking about, the god of chaos said with an ambiguous smile. Oh, yeah. Sure truth. You totally didn't get involved, the blacksmith god snapped sarcastically. No, I'm telling you I really didn't do anything. Seth said, slightly annoyed. Sure, I will believe you. When that fairy turns into a flying pig. She definitely eats and behaves like one. Hades gave a mean comment. Both looked at Hades, who kept his expressionless face and munched popcorn. Maybe they were being played. The door was blown open and an angry magician shadow walked in. I warned you last time. I revoke your viewing privileges for the next 4 months. Seth. Hephaestus looked at the god of chaos with a betrayed look. He had almost been played and turned on his own uncle, but it was this donkey face who did it in the end. Oh, come in. Don't look at me like that. You two can still choose a private champion. I had to do something. Hades didn't seem to give a flying flip about what they were doing and kept munching popcorn as Seth sucked in almost 200 souls. Let others play, he was winning anyway. Seth, the god of chaos and destruction, was pulled out of the room by the system god ripping at his ear. Hephaestus had a thoughtful look on his face. He's not wrong, uncle. Both of us can choose one additional champion. When are you going to do it? No need to hurry. There are still a lot of gods that wait for the right time. Once that world has developed some more, it will probably come a time of champions. Hephaestus nodded. He had not partaken in many of these system games, but he too had experienced that many gods choose the same opportune time to choose their champion, which always led to a great struggle and competition. It made it all the more interesting to see how already established champions will react to the invasion of fresh blood. He was secretly glad to have chosen Seth and ended up sharing him. He had 2 seats in the first row for that stage and could watch people in both positions. Originally, they were going to visit a restaurant and celebrate Seth's new class, but they lost their appetite after the altercation at the entrance of the church. Watching 200 corpses dissolve into smelly black goo was not very helpful before having a meal. Instead, they immediately returned to Mina's mar, leaving the dirty job of cleaning up the mess to the old priest. Are we going to get new armor now? Seth promised. Seth promised. The two immediately started bugging him right after they returned to the tower. They kept up their image in the city, but all facades fell when they were alone. I will start soon, but not today. Let's forget what just happened and go celebrate. He couldn't really blame them, as he had indeed kept promising to make them personalized stuff for a long time now. Seth kept putting it off until he had the fitting skills and materials. Now he also had an ample resource of souls. He had come to realize something important. The legendary rating was still far off into the distance. Even when he used epic materials to the best of his skills, he had been unable to get above epic. He didn't know what the reason was, but he had plateaued. He had written to Tord about it, and it was in this way that he found out about his misconception. The legendary and mythical rating above epic were very special ranks one could not make easily even with legendary or mythical materials. The rank above epic was called Relic and was like a kind of prototype for a legendary or mythical rating. These items were judged to have the needed requirement to grow to a legendary or mythical rating. In Tord's assessment, it was required to be at least craftsman level or fulfill very special conditions to make relic gear. Especially since one needed to be a craftsman to work with legendary materials. As for the how a relic grew into a legendary item, nobody really knew the specifics. The dwarf had not told him much about the higher ranks because he had been a far cry off of being able to reach these back then. He actually still was. It became exponentially harder to grind his crafting skills the higher the level went. Seth knew that he was actually leveling really fast compared to traditional blacksmiths who needed decades to reach the master or even the craftsman level. But he was just a human. Even with the system's theoretically increased lifespan, he didn't feel like he had the leeway to go at things slowly. And he didn't want to make the world more dangerous for him and his people by single-handedly raising the average standard of equipment. That's why he hoped that his new class and the upgrades it came with would be enough to enable him to create relic gear with his current level. Seth had experimented quite a bit in the last 3 months to make sure that the inscription and the enchantments did not get into each other's way if he used one on an item and the other on a soul. With Al's help, Allison was even able to come with a recipe for an ink that could allow Seth to etch an inscription onto a soul armament. The main ingredients were a soul and the crushed nucleus of a high-ranking undead. Thanks to this he also found out that the power behind inscriptions had a higher affinity with the soul armaments as they came from demons. With this, his chosen modus operandi became to always make soul armaments and put inscriptions onto them, while he put engravings onto the items, he would infuse them too. But even then, he could not blast past the epic rating. If even the new class didn't change this, then he could only make the best possible epic items for the Lords of Mina's March. This was an issue for another day, not now. The three entered the cafeteria where the grinding-crazed gourmet hunter was having the time of his life turning ingredients into food. Link had gotten a lot better in the last 3 months and could now use rare ingredients to cook. Almost all his dishes were able to give permanent increases to stats and attributes, sometimes even to several. It was just that food made of rare ingredients was not enough to increase their main attributes anymore. But Seth had already gotten various resistances and attribute increases from Link's superfoods. At some point, Link would be able to use epic ingredients and then they would get another huge boost in permanent improvements. It was another reason for the formation of the Oath Guard. The beasts that the parties of the field service currently needed to hunt to keep leveling all produced rare and epic materials. Since the parties currently lacked a hunter, they would often get only the best materials of a prey and not everything. This meant that they brought back mostly epic materials. Currently Seth and Otto the pharmacist were the only ones with levels high enough to utilize epic materials. The Oath Guard would take over the job of farming mostly rare ingredients to allow Link, Allison, and Evie to grind their skills and hopefully catch up with the field service's prowess. Besides the Oath Guard, they also planned to take in 1 or 2 more alchemists or healers to deal with the increased influx of materials. The Turquoise Anvil was slowly turning into a high-end establishment for adventurers of a higher level, and their stocks of potions kept being emptied out. Allison and Evie needed some help to meet the customer demand in the future. Seth had no problems producing uncommon or rare weapons and even armor, thanks to Cerberus, who could keep making blanks and standard pieces all night long. All he needed to do was finishing and refining the products which he normally used to train his etching and master poems. His prowess did not go unnoticed by the demonic side of Delta. People of the Bard Academy and other demon bard had soon found out he was happily selling wares with demon inscription. Their reaction was rather cold. Even though he used inscriptions on weapons and armor, in their eyes this was just copying others' works, as he used traditional works and nothing original. Seth had tried to come up with his own works, but he was simply lacking. Now that he was an infernal skalda with songwriting, he hoped he could shine. If it still didn't work, he wouldn't care. The traditional texts were more than enough for his own purposes. Seth, Mina, and Finn were soon joined by the rest of the members of Mina's Mar, who slowly returned from their own duties to enjoy a meal. They all congratulated Seth, and everything escalated into a party deep into the morning of the next day. Chapter 267 Jonah's Bling. After recovering from his hangover, Seth returned to his blacksmith lair where he brooded over his dark machinations. Also known as, he was planning out the gear for the Lords of Mina's march. The first was Jonah. He talked with the vampiric swordman for quite some time. The result was that he would make Jonah a new set of accessories. Jonah didn't want a new armor. Seth agreed as he had already chosen the best possible material for it and there was not much improvement to be expected. Seth really just wanted to try out the vampire soul. His first thought was to make a weapon with Valen's soul, but similar to the armor, Aderlas did not need a replacement. The sword kept growing at a tremendous rate under Jonah's careful nurturing. In the end, he agreed with Jonah's request. Seth fathomed that the biggest advantage of harvested souls was the skill bonus they gave. The vampire's powers would definitely shine in a weapon, but an elegant set of jewelry would not fall behind that. He also had to take Jonah's second class into account, the Blood Monk. It was a variation of the Blood Priest that increased Jonah's skills in blood magic and weaponless combat. Remembering the class's specifics, the choice became clear. It also helped him decide on the possible enchantments. During his studies, Seth had found a whole book with demonic songs he could use to imbue an effect that could help Jonah with his resource management. There were two in particular that could work in tandem. The first was a forging ballad that granted an effect called Essence Devourer. The second was a chant called Anima Well. These texts that could be used for crafting things were often weird and hard to understand in the beginning. Thanks to some help from Al and Ember he managed to understand these topics and mastered them. Essence Devourer was similar to Life Steal, but it could not just absorb life force but also mana from a target. The original use was rather unsavory as it included using living organisms as a battery. It worked on weakened targets and did not need damage to be dealt beforehand. The cost was that some of the harvested energy was sent to the demon that granted this blessing. The Anima Well originated from the same setting. The chant could turn a fitting core into a container for life force. A lot of these spells worked with rather uncomfortable topics because dealing with greater demons and demonic magic usually involved the use of life force or souls as a baseline. The vampire fang lent itself as such a core. Seth decided to make a necklace. For this, it needed to be brought into shape. At the moment it was a big pearly fang, like that of a dog. Seth used energy circulation and reinforcement and forged the tooth into a pearly bead with a light sheen and the texture of glass. He slightly flattened the bead into a coin and punches a hole into it for a string. The coin was placed into a magic formation while chanting the Anima Well. In the process of chanting the ballad, tears of blood started flowing from his eyes. They fell onto the pendant and the formation where they soaked into the formation and the pendant. The pearly white coin turned into a crimson blood bead. Using the claw, Seth planned to make 2 rings. The Essence Devourer needed to be as close to the enemy as possible. Rings were the best option, especially since Jonah also fought with his claws. Aside from the claw, Seth used crimson steel. It was the result of Seth's experiments with the blood baths. After feasting on rare and epic blood for several months, this was the end state of dark steel. It was the upper limit the material could reach and stop strengthening. At this point, the original effect of the feasting ballad became dormant, no matter what blood he used on it. Crimson steel barely reached an epic rating. Although it was another method to refine a metal into a higher ranked version, it fell far short of the divine methods for creating bones of Seth or Olympian silver. But the affinities were more or less worth it. The metal had a high affinity for darkness and could enhance the performance of a new forging ballad and even inscriptions. He started singing the forging ballad when he shaped the big ugly brown-gray fingernail using energy manipulation too and reinforcement just how he did with the fang. The ugly thing turned into 2 cream-colored oval beads, he would set onto the rings. Knowing the dimensions of the stone, he forged the rings from a piece of crimson steel before setting the beige vampire jewels into the crimson black metal ring. He tightened the fixtures parallel with the end of the song. Seth could already feel a slight suction from the rings, but it was not done yet. Now came the most important step, the vampire soul. The plan was to use the soul to connect these 2 items into a set. With Leave 5 in spirit forging he was now able to forge split souls into armaments that showed their potential before infusion. Onto these 2 soul armaments he forged from Valen's soul he engraved the formations for life steal and HP recovery. He had come up with the idea, but it was with Alzalsa's help that he was able to work out the details for the set and the estimated effects. Ding! You have completed an epic set. Ding! You have completed your first relic. +5 to all attributes. Ding! You are the first to create a relic level item. +10 to all attributes. Ding! Title, World's best blacksmith gained. It takes a master to make a relic. Proficiency gain is slightly increased. Ding. Title, Brainy gained. You have reached 100p in intelligence. Plus 0.5 magical damage per 1p intelligence. Ding. Title, Fleet-footed gained. You have reached 100p in agility. Plus 0.5 speed per 1p agility. Ding. Hephaestus is very satisfied with your progress. Your trait has slightly strengthened. Ding. Seth is happy about your efforts. Voice of Seth is slightly strengthened. The messages rang together with a notification of synergy when he pulled the 3 pieces of jewelry out of the waters of Styx. Left vampiric ring. Relic. Epic vampire set 1/3. Durability, 1300. 1 plus 15% mana regeneration in darkness. 2 on touch, absorb life force equivalent to 20% of your own from the target. 3 on touch, absorb mana equivalent to 20% of your own from the target. 4 claw damage is increased by 100%. 5 claw durability is increased by 100%. 6.15% of dealt damage is recovered as health. 7 plus 10% health regeneration. A terrifying ring from the hands of Journeyman Smith using demonic arts and unknown means to create a peculiar effect. Once rumors of the ring's terrifying effects spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect. Ranks of skills related to blood magic are increased by 1 rank. Ranks of skills pertaining illusion and transformation gain 3 levels. Skill cost of vampire type skill is reduced by 30%. Skill, Vampiric Rush. Limited power. Use stored life force to increase your damage, speed, and health regeneration for as long as the stored power lasts. Plus 500% damage, plus 300% speed, recover 10% health every second. Hungry Coin. Epic. Epic Vampire set 1/3. Durability, 1000. 1 life force and mana can be directly stored in the Hungry Coin. 2 excess life force and mana that are absorbed can be stored and used to heal or directly as resources for magic or skills. 3 result of life steal effects are improved by 20%. 4 overall chance to cause bleeding is increased by 15%. 5 20% of dealt damage is recovered as health. 6 plus 15% health regeneration. A weird necklace from the hands of Journeyman Smith using demonic arts and unknown means to create a peculiar effect. Set effect, Collapsed. With this set, Jonah would gain an overall power up on top of the option to store surplus life force from any life steal effect into the necklace. It was like having a second health and mana bar, but it could become greater than his original one. Once Seth gave them to the vampiric swordsman, he would have an epic armor, epic weapon, and more than epic accessories. But there was one thing Seth still owed to the swordsman. A proper mask. As the material of the mask, he brought out the rare bones of Seth. They too could have an affinity with the macabre demon magic, but they also had a chaotic element that made them unfit for the rings. This chaotic attribute caused items made from the bones to have random effects that could be either detrimental or positive. Some had 2 effects that balanced each other out. Seth ended up making several masks as he didn't like the effects that often came with the randomness of the material. Stuff like causing blindness to the wearer but increasing speed, or making the wearer resistant to most diseases but especially weak against the common cold. One mask even had a voice-changing function. This would have been perfect if it didn't make the wearer sound like a little girl. Finally, there was an acceptable option after several attempts. The wearer would be unable to speak, and in exchange, their hearing would be improved. Jonah didn't like to speak anyway. It was not perfect, but acceptable. For all the masks he had used the same forging ballad. It was a ballad that could destabilize someone's mental state when they looked at the item. This was no direct negative effect, but it made fear effects more effective. The cost was that the wearer himself would also be hit with half the effect. To counter this, Seth planned to infuse a soul from the monsters of the fog dimension. He didn't infuse it during the forging but forged a soul armament of the mask from one of the uncommon medium souls. The mask was also a good example of mixing enchantments and inscriptions. He carved the complex conduits for fear and demotivate onto the soul armament and a poem that could cause discomfort the longer one looked onto the mask. The poem was called Tomb of Mind and summoned the powers of a demon called the Mind Eater. Similar to the ballad, it caused mental derangement, but Tomb of Mind would peak in causing a mental shock or a stunned state. When he dunked it into the barrel, he got the notification that the item was finished. Demonic Mask. Relic. Physics Defense 270. Mag Defense, 386. Durability, 5000. 1 wearer can't speak. 2 increased auditory senses. 3 destabilize opponent's mental state, plus 19% success chance to mind effects. 4 active skill, demonic image. A horrifying mask made by Journeyman Smith. The macabre grimace of a demon bears witness to the maker's twisted imagination. A mix of several magic treatments led to effects befitting the imagery of the piece. Once rumors of this mask's terrifying effects spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Active skill, demonic image, no cost, 5 minutes cooldown. If demonic image is activated, it will send a mental attack to anyone currently observing the mask. Depending on stats and level differences, the target will fall into stages of panic, fear, demotivation, or mental shock. Seth stared at the mask, which seemed to have awoken to wicked life of its own. Of course, it was just his imagination, but just looking at the mask made him feel uncomfortable. He even doubted slightly that he had created this mask. Maybe the devil has directed my hands? He jokingly thought. No matter what, Jonah would definitely be happy about the mask. It also fit his second class. Most of the effects had merged into the active skill, while the soul's effect had managed to completely counter the negative side effect of the ballad. The mask had the same durability as the staff of Seth. Another weird aspect of this divine material. No matter the thickness of the material, it had no say about the durability. Seth put everything in a chest and left the shop for today. Chapter 268. Preparations for the exam. While Seth was busy making equipment, the other members of Minar were also busy with their tasks. The leaders of field service were working on the preparations for the exam and the management of the Oath Guard. Monique had spent the last few days tracking down an old acquaintance. He was perfect for training and operating the Oath Guard. The sounds of her high heels hitting the ground announced her arrival in the narrow rundown hallway. At the end of the hallway was a door with a glass window. The writing on the door said Jack Felton, Private Investigator. She gently knocked against the door, making the window rattle. After waiting for a few minutes, she knocked again. Before she could do it a third time, the door finally opened. Opening the door was an older man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and pronounced stubble. His skin had a sickly color, and his eyes were sunken in. His balding hair was hidden under a hat. The hat's shadow made the man's sunken eyes look like hollow eye sockets. Monique? What are you doing here? He asked grumpily. He left the door ajar for her and returned to his desk, where he leaned back and put his feet on the table. Ah, you knew I was in town? I wanted to surprise you, she said daintily. I am a private detective. I knew you were in town for almost 3 months. But what surprised me was that you actually joined a clan. The solitary tigress found a pack? That one really surprised me. Monique sat down in the chair on the opposite side of the desk with a sigh. Oh, please. You know I wasn't alone by choice. You could say I found a mountain to call home. Jack grumbled in agreement. He knew the girl even before the world went to shit. Even knew her father. Then what brings you here? Are you looking for someone? Yes, I was looking for you. Mr. Instructor. Don't call me that. I'm a private detective. You know that, girl. Come on, old man. You did a great job when everything went downhill. Why are you so eager to return to your poor existence as a detective? Are there even customers for your work these days? Sorry, I can't do that anymore. You know what happened? Watching all those youths die. I can't go through that again, he said with a petrified face. Monique also grimaced when he mentioned the incident. I wouldn't be here if I thought it was possible for something like that to happen again. It was a catastrophe, and we were all unprepared. Things are different now. At least there are at Mina's March. I would like you to meet our Tower Master and observe the examination for the Oath Guard. Oath Guard? Was that what you call your little private army? Monique looked a little embarrassed when Jack called the planned forces a private army. I'm sure other people would misunderstand it as such. What else are they? The old man asked sarcastically. Well, if you asked our Tower Master, they are a farming force and final depot for equipment we judged too good to be sold. Too good to be? Don't tell me the nonsense about a full set of epic gear is true. Monique only smiled mysteriously. If you want to know, you should come and talk to the Tower Master. I suggested you for the administrator position of the Oath Guard. I thought it would be the best position considering your class. That's right, Monique had not called him instructor for no reason. Jack Felton had the rare class instructor. People judged to be in his care will gain skill proficiency faster. It also let him mirror the skills of his trainee in sparring but at a higher level. Sparring with him would be like fighting a better version of oneself. There were other skills, like intuitively knowing the flaws in another's techniques and being able to give constructive criticism. His own skills grew with the progress of his trainees. He was a great teacher back then and he would do a great job in charge of the Oath Guard. Monique was sure of it. Her tenacity made the old man sigh. Fine. I will have a conversation with your tower master. Mina's Mar. Said tower master was sitting in his workshop and was brooding over the pieces of a leather armor. The material used for the parts was the epic-rated leather of a Shadow Emuji. He saw the fine dark leather in the auction house and immediately bought it. The properties were more than ideal for Mina, who was a mix of Shadow Assassin and Shadow Mage. The leather had the inherent power to strengthen all skills related to the Shadow attribute. The problem was that his sewing sucked. With his beginner leave 9 skill, he could not even handle uncommon fabrics or threads. Using a common thread on this epic armor was unacceptable. He couldn't compromise on this. Especially not since it was the gear for his girlfriend. He stood before the question whether to grind his sewing skill, the skill he disliked the most, or let Nico Booz finish the armor and split the proficiency. The spell weaver had not reached the level necessary to process epic material, yet. But could definitely sew together prepared leather parts. He could even use a thread made of shadow magic to do so. Grinding an unliked skill or splitting a little proficiency. With a heavy heart, Seth decided to leave the sewing to the professionals. He would contact Nico Booz later that day. For now, he put the armor pieces aside and brought out something else. It was the first piece of epic Olympian silver Seth had managed to refine from Mithril. There were only 5 billion Argentine pesos of it for now, and Seth decided to use 2 for one of Mina's weapons. For her second weapon, he wanted to use a bar of crimson steel. Back when he started learning the ballads, Seth had made a practice dagger Mina was still using. At that time, he had promised her to make an even better one. That was what the crimson steel was for. Now that he actually had a fitting class, he could also comprehend the ratings of the ballads and texts he read. Although only 2 sentences long, the short verse praising Elufsif the Assyrian was rare to epic rated. It was thanks to various factors like his high level and enchantment working together that he was able to somehow finish that inscription. Now, after 3 months of studying and grinding, and with the fitting epic rated ink, he was confident in succeeding it with less effort. He started off with the crimson steel and forged a slender blade similar in form to a Ziphos. A dagger that would excel in both cutting and stabbing. He integrated a small filigree crossguard in the shape of 2 snakes biting the blade. The 2 snakes were a hint at the 2 main effects he planned for the dagger. The pommel was featureless for now, but Seth intended to carve it into a knot of snakes later. During the process, he sang a new forging ballad he took a liking to. It was a rare ballad calling upon the powers of Debur. It imbued the weapon with a chance to inflict the status effect of malady. This would slow the opponent and make healing less effective. It even had a chance to cloud the target's mind like a high fever. The fatal thing about malady was that it would not heal on its own. One needed either a priest to cast cure or a potion that healed uncommon or rare diseases. In exchange, malady had no big effect on targets with high endurance, health, or the undead. There were a few other exceptions, but those were the biggest ones. Besides the effect, it had a catchy rhythm too, which made it easier to sing while also infusing the uncommon soul of a creature from the fog dimension. There were not many left, but Seth was sure this was the right call. He infused the biggest part in the blade, a smaller part in the pommel, and another small part into the wood for the handle. He fitted the finished blade with a wooden handle made of a small piece of arcane oak. A rare wood that was usually used in wizard staffs. It had no own affinity or effects, but the high magic conductivity could have a positive influence on the effects of other materials or spells cast. To carve the pommel he used his pyrokinesis. The biggest reason the skill had managed to level up in the last 3 months, was this. Seth had no power tools for intricate carving, so he tried to use his flames instead. He was immune to the damage, so he didn't mind the molten metal that was flowing down his hand had he used the heat to form and carve the pommel into a knot of snake bodies. Before he assembled the dagger, he brought the blade to the etching table. Now came the most important step. With a fine brush, he took up the precious ink from the small vial. With a steady hand, he redrew the runes projected onto the blade by blueprint. With a calm mind, he inscribed the blade with the verses praising Elufsif the Assyrian. The ink bit into the crimson metal and formed a reseated lettering of darker enamel. Seth assembled the dagger and finished it by dunking it into the waters of Styx to affix the soul to its new body. Ding! The item has improved due to a synergy between the item and your trait Olympian Myth. Chapter 269. Mina's Gear Solid. Ding! The item has improved due to a synergy between the item and your trait Olympian Myth. With a surprised look on his face, he pulled the finished dagger back out of the water. He had taken some symbolism from Greek mythology, but he definitely had not planned for this. Asclepius Needle. Relic. Damage, 1075. Durability, 2000. 125% chance to inflict strong malady on hit. 235% chance to cause mental disruption on hit, effects, stun/confusion. 3 Elufs of the Asurient will feast on target's mana for 10 seconds, preventing any magic or active skills from being used. 4 Active skill, Down with the Sickness. 5 Active skill, Plague Strike. A powerful rendition of the God of Healing hidden weapon by the hands of Journeyman Smith. Just because he invented a medicine that could even bring the dead back to life, didn't mean he was somebody to mess with. He who can cure the sickness can also bring it. Once rumors of the dagger's effects spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. His blacksmith proficiency shot up by almost 10%. The improvement a relic brought could not be underestimated. After making the accessories for Jonah, his goldsmith had also easily leveled up. He had expected the first 3 effects. The synergy had improved the first one to strong malady and added 2 active skills. Active skill, Down with the Sickness, no cost, cooldown, 1h. Health regeneration and exterior healing is reduced by 50%. Choose one. Inflict a target in sight with a random disease. 10% chance that it's contagious and infects nearby enemies. Heal an ally in sight by 20% of their health over a span of 30 seconds. 10% chance that nearby allies are also healed by a small amount. Active skill, Plague Strike, no cost, 2/4h. Inflict a deadly disease on target. Seth wasn't sure about the last one. Was it like a death sentence? Or could the disease be cured by high-ranking magic or items? Well, one thing was for sure, the item had turned out even meaner than he had expected. Even the Lich icon could not give a clear answer. He would leave it to Mina to find out how effective the last option was. He put Asclepius Needle into a weapon rack on the side. Looking at the time, he realized that he had already been working for over 4 hours. Even with his smithy's speed boosts, it took a good while to make a relic item. He got himself some food before continuing. Mina liked to dual-wield daggers or at least switch between weapons. Seth brought out the billet made from 2 bars of epic Olympian silver and forged the single-edged blade of a fine short sword similar to a yatagan. The one-handed weapon had a length just in between where some people would call it a long knife and others a short sword. He integrated a small guard and wide pommel to keep the user's hands from slipping. For the smithing ballad, he chose the soulbind. It was important nobody else would be able to use this short sword. While he was forging the epic metal, he could feel a change happening in Karen's obel but refrained from checking to keep his focus on finishing the weapon. After forging everything out, he took a small break and inspected his hammer. Karen's obel. Epic, growth. Damage, 970. Durability 4000. 1. The damage is raised in dark places. 2 plus 15% dark damage mana cost, 10 per minute. 3 slow digestion plus. 4 plus elemental affinities, plus. 5 15% chance to imbue an item with a magical effect, plus. 6 50% resource cost of all skills and abilities. Like the coin needed to pay the ferryman Karen, to bring the souls to the underworld, this hammer is needed for a soul to find a new purpose in the hand of a spirit smith. Karen's obel is used to directly forge and damage souls. Plus 50% chance to stagger, plus 20% damage to armor. The hammer grows by feeding on souls and materials. Karen's obel can forge any material but consumes mana corresponding to the change in the structure of anything that is not metal. Only works on the anvil of Tartarus. Other options will be unlocked upon growth. The hammer had finally grown to an epic rating. And the growth was impressive. The list of affinities the hammer granted was collapsed but encompassed every element at various degrees. The magic effects it could imbue were based on all the materials he had used until today. The list was quite long. He checked the blade, but the 15% chance had not triggered on Mina's short sword. Using the grinding wheel and files, he ground and filed everything into shape before adding the handle scales made of arcane oak. Fitting the soul he chose, he used a poem called Frostbitten talking about the relentless cold of the night. It did not aim for a specific frost demon, so the effect varied greatly depending on the talent and skill of the bard. With 4 verses it was on the longer side, and Seth had to place 2 verses on each side of the blade. He used the epic ink to etch the runes into the metal and could feel his power drain. It seemed like had the attention of a big wig. Sweat covered his forehead when he finally finished the inscription. Taking a look at the clock, he decided that he would be able to finish the sword today and still have time to contact Nico Booz. The last step was the reason why he had to make the weapon soul-bound. With the new level in spirit forging and soul infusion, the infused soul armament could now keep the hidden attribute to inflict direct damage to a soul. With the followers of Zarkan appearing more often lately, Seth saw it fitting to have his people own such weapons. But soul damage was a scary topic. The sorceress had told him that the soul could only heal very slowly, if at all. As they knew from the reconstruction of Evie's hands, healing magic was based on the soul. It would make healing wounds hard and dismembered limbs almost impossible to recover. He forged an exact copy of the short sword from the rare frigid soul he had repaired and upgraded with 2 of the cold soul from the ice trolls. On the soul weapon, he carved the complex circuit for strength twice. Seth finished the weapon by infusing the soul armament into the sword and dunking it into the water barrel. Shard of Biting Ice. Relic. Damage 1400. Durability, 4000. 1 active skill, Ice Field. 2 active skill, Cursed Frost. 3 plus 30% affinity to ice. 4 plus 30% affinity to darkness. 5 plus 80 strength. 6 Soulbind. A bitter cold weapon created by Journeyman Smith imbued by strong demonic power. Once rumors of the dagger's effects spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Another relic bringing him almost 10% proficiency in blacksmith and enchantment. His approach proved to be successful. The 2 skills were quite terrifying. Active skill, Ice Field, no cost, cooldown, 20 minutes. Creates an ice field within a 2-5 m radius around the user. Enemies within the area will be slowed and weakened over time. Active skill, Cursed Frost, no cost, cooldown, 1 h. A hit enemy is encased in a carapace of cursed ice. The ice will absorb life force for up to 5 minutes or until the shell is broken. Seth nodded satisfied. If this wasn't some overpowered gear, then what was? He did a little victory dance, sure nobody would see him, and put the sword into the weapon rack. It's great you are happy, boss, Mary said, standing in the door with a frozen smile. Mary. How long did you stand there? A while. Please forget what you saw. I would love to. Anyway. Why did you look for me? I need you to look over the preparations for the exam. Also, Nico Booz asked to meet you. Nico? Great timing. I was planning to meet him afterward. Let's go. With that, the 2 vanished from the smithy. Chapter 270. Somewhere else, 4. A terrible headache wreaked havoc in his brain. What happened? Where was he? It felt as if he just woke up, but he had no idea whether he had slept or not. Just what had happened? He looked around himself. It was a dim clinical room. Weird devices surrounded him to the left and right with displays he couldn't make sense of. As if left in a hurry, plates of various syringes with colorful liquids and other tools had fallen to the ground. Some tubes hung free while some led to catheters on his hands. What was going on? The thinking was slow as if his thoughts swam in honey. He stumbled forward and almost slipped on the liquid from broken flasks and plastic bags. Carefully he walked forward step by step, having a hard time keeping his balance. For a moment he was held back by the tubes stuck in his body, but he ripped himself free. Almost losing his stand in the process. He pushed open a wide double door and stumbled into a just as dimly lit hallway. The linoleum flooring felt cold and smooth under his naked feet. The only light came from the red, flickering worn lights at the ceiling. Was something going on? At this moment he couldn't even register that it was a weird lighting choice. For a while, he didn't consciously act and just wandered through the labyrinth of rooms and hallways. It was hard trying to remember what happened. He remembered living in a city. He had fought. Why had he fought? An icky sticky liquid stuck to the sole of his foot and brought him back to the present. With shock, he realized his surroundings. Blood splatters covered the ceiling, floor, and walls. Cell doors lined the hallway, many of them left ajar with blood trails leading into, or out of them. Just, where had he ended up? Listening closely, he could hear the quiet sounds of crunching flesh. He backed away from the hallway filled with cell doors. A door with green light caught his attention and he entered without much thinking. It was not an emergency exit but some kind of security office. Maybe he could get some information on this place? He carefully closed the door to not get the attention of whatever was in those cells. The blood trails on the ground indicated that the guard had left and wouldn't come back anytime soon. There were blacked-out video screens, paper strewn across the ground from the file cabinet that had fallen over. The moment of calm helped him sort his thoughts and his mind became clearer. Still, he couldn't remember much from before. He started picking up the papers. Maybe the files could help him? The files described how test subjects, only named by numbers, were supposed to be handled. Danger categories, level of intelligence, diet and environmental preference. Nothing helpful to him in his current situation. He kept reading anyways. The description of a tremendous status increase after increase tickled a memory. Status? Status. Name, number 967. Title, Brave. Level, 62. EXP, 15%. Race, Artificial Druid. Sex. Age, 20. Class, Martial Artist/Tiger Claw Monk. Affiliation. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 700. Strength 345. Dexterity 10. Agility, 294. Intelligence 30. Willpower 35. Endurance 270. Personality, 15. Luck 35. A status window popped up in front of his eyes. He was assaulted by a heavy headache again. Number 967? He was sure he had a different name. What happened to him? Was he also a test subject like those beasts in the files? No. It couldn't be true. He denied his thoughts. He was still human. He was still himself? Who was he even? His mind stopped. He picked up the chair that had fallen to the ground and sat on it. Staring at the desk, he fell into a loop of thinking about his own existence. It was incredibly hard for him to catch a clear thought. As if out of an old habit, he started operating the computer. He grabbed the mouse and zapped through the security cameras. It was the only accessible option. Those labeled by cell numbers were blacked out, but those of the surrounding corridors still worked. He found a hallway with a stair sign and writing on the wall. The doors to the staircase were ripped out and rested on the floor. Floor 8. It was the trigger he needed to get out of the loop he was trapped in. He didn't know who he was, but he could try to find out. There had to be more information on other floors. And if not? He could leave and try finding out who he was outside. Even without all his memories. He was still himself and he would simply get back what they had taken from him. The problem was reaching the stairs. Leaving this room meant entering a corridor full of open rooms filled with things. He stared at the control panel for a while until he found the dirty makeshift label saying, Door Controls. Was it a good idea to try this? He had no idea why all doors were open, in the first place. Would they close or would he just alarm the beasts inside? The staircase wasn't far. There were 3 possible outcomes. The first was the doors closed shut and were held up. In that case, he was completely fine to leave without any worries. In the case that nothing happened, he would just have to sneak out. Nothing would change. Worst case, the doors closed but couldn't hold back the beasts. It would buy time to run and escape through the staircase. His chances were good, and he decided to press the door controls. His heart almost jumped out of his chest when a loud siren rang together with the sound of tens of doors slamming shut. Did it work? Carefully opening the door, he looked down the hallway. All cells were shut. He could hear the banging behind the doors, but it didn't seem like they would open any time soon. The sight calmed his weary heart and he confidently left the security office in the direction of the stair. He came before the entrance to the staircase, only to be told that he had celebrated too early. From the staircase before him emerged a giant beast. Its jaws and body were covered in blood as if it waded through a sea of carnage. The creature barely fit between the floor and the ceiling with its giant build. Like a bear on steroids but the size and skin of a small elephant. The head seemed amphibian or reptilian with rows of sharp teeth and 2 cold eyes fixed onto him. Frozen in place, he could only stare as it got close. A jolt ran through his body, like a cold shower. It sniffed on him and the aggression in its eyes receded. 3 sniffs, 1 snort, and it shoved him to the side to pass by. It proceeded to enter the place H just came from and smash open the doors one by one. No need to wait around, he said to himself, and ran down the stairs. Only to reach floor 9. Did he remember wrong? Down should lead out, but why did the floor number increase? Was this place underground? Now that he thought about it, he had not seen anything like windows. Going down meant getting deeper into this weird facility. Going up should lead to the exit. Number 967 decided to go down. Escaping this place felt less important than finding out more about what happened to him. But before he continued further down the stairs, he checked the 9th floor. The floor was filled with offices and laboratories. A great shock hit him when he saw his reflection in one of the glass windows. Had he looked like this before? He may have lost his memories, but his skin didn't look like this before. His eyes had turned a crimson red without pupils. His skin was rough with a pale grey-blue tinge. His head was smooth with a mohawk of fleshy spikes. But his appearance changed as he was watching and slowly turned back to a human. He had no recollection of his own face, but he had an easier time identifying with this face. Number 967 already knew that something was wrong with him. He continued looking around floor 9. Some offices were completely smashed, others looked like the researcher had only left a few minutes ago to get a coffee. Like on the floor above, he saw no corpses, only blood. The papers he found here talked about all kinds of serums and their effects. There were a lot of words he could not understand. The information he could garner from these papers was that this place was called Hive 5. A subterranean facility in the vicinity of a place called Beta. After a while, he returned to the stair and kept descending into the darkness. Chapter 271. The exam registration. Seth only needed to look over some of the budgets for the exam before they left for the city. This time they used the elevator. 2 months after the incident in the Willis building, they were able to buy the burnt-out ruin. Above the elevator shaft, they built a small office building for their dealings in the city. It was easier to have a second way out, other than the teleport to the church. It was not finished yet but was closer to their shop than the church. They just wanted to leave, when they saw Nico Booz approaching the building from the outside. Nico, we were on our way to you. What are you doing here? Seth greeted the eccentric fashion designer. Hello. I'm sorry, Seth. I just couldn't wait any longer, the tailor answered. The man seemed driven, and his eyes kept shifting between Seth in a specific direction. You seem to be in a hurry. Do you want to come in to drink a coffee or? Can you lend me some money? It broke out of the man. Mary and Seth looked at him in surprise. To their knowledge, the tailor had no financial problems. Why did he suddenly need money? The other read their expressions and answered. It's technically your fault. You told me to take a look at the auction house for more fabrics. Yesterday someone put in an epic fabric. Although I can't use it yet, I want to buy it. I already spent most of my system gold. A light of realization lit up on their faces. Sure. How much do you need? Seth answered jovially. I just need 200 gold. The auction is ending soon, and it should be enough to secure the bid. Mary looked awkwardly. That was a lot of money. Seth smiled. Sure. I will even lend it to you without interest. Instead, I have some work for you. I need you to assemble some leather armors with your special thread. Boss, you can't just. Don't worry, Mary. I am using my own money for this deal. Ever since Minasmar became a guild, the proceeds did not only wander into his own pocket. They had a business account and budgets, while Seth and the lords got wages instead of splitting everything among themselves. They entered the half-built building to finish the deal. Mary used one of her skills to create a contract, and Seth handed the tailor 200 gold coins in cash and the parts of Mina's leather armor. Part of the promise was the assembly of 2 more leather armors. One would be Lydia's armor and the third would be either a new armor for Evie or maybe Jonah. He wasn't sure yet, but it didn't hurt to have another coupon to evade something he didn't like. Nico left in a hurry after he got the money and the parts. Great, since this is dealt with, let's eat out and return to the tower. I'm actually quite tired. Delta, next day. A long queue of people has formed in front of a half-finished building. Where once stood the Willis building was now growing a regal construction in the style of the Krna Empire. The first 2 floors with their imposing facade and big entrance door were already finished. The rest was still veiled in tarp, but what could be seen already stuck out like a model among a crowd of wallflowers. Everyone here wanted to register for the exams that would be held in roughly a week. Jess and James had come early, but the people had already filled the street in the front. Some seemed to even have camped in the street. The two adventurers had spent their time in the dungeon until late the other day and couldn't come earlier. They could only hope that the exam was not limited by participants. Out of the way. Let me through, you lowlives! A tall burly man was shoving his way through the crowd. He had a chest like a barrel and arms like a tree trunk. With his broad arms, he split the sea of people. The people following him had a similar attitude. Their expressions were haughty and their noses high up in the air. Isn't that the Adventurer King? The Adventurer King? What is that guy doing here? The Adventurer King? Who is that? James asked, confused. Was this guy rudely cutting the line a big shot? He wasn't up to date with gossip and stuff like that. He looked to Jess, questioning. The girl beside him sighed at his ignorance. He is one of the few apostles that have surfaced since the apocalypse. He's the chosen of some god of war or something. He claims to be the strongest adventurer in Delta. Never heard of him. Does he have a clan? Nope. Supposedly he doesn't want to follow anyone weaker than himself. She glanced at the brute pushing through the crowd, or it's just that nobody wants to deal with his nasty personality. James only nodded in agreement. Hey, get back and stand in line like everyone else, a brave hero of justice stepped up to stop the splitter of crowds. The Colossus barely gave him a glance before swinging his arm. The strike caved in the brave hero's nose, and he was sent flying for several meters. The party following the Adventurer King only sneered at the crumpled man on the ground as they passed by. A quick demonstration of the consequences had silenced the other bystanders. The burly man made his way to the reception like a bulldozer and finally came to a stop in front of the desk. The reception staff looked up at him with disinterest. I want to register for the Oath Guard, he said proudly. You can only register for the exam. There are no direct admissions to the Oath Guard, the staff said lethargically. But I am the Adventurer King. You should be honored that I am willing to join. Other clans would kill for this opportunity. Forget the Oath Guard, you should offer me and my party a private suit of epic gear, the burly argued, overflowing with confidence. Exactly. We are the elites of Delta, a tall hawk-nosed woman with a bow bragged. The staff only lifted an eyebrow and slid a paper towards the man. Fill in the form and your party can enter the exam. Like I said. Forget about the exam. Bring out your superior. I bet they will gladly speak to me personally, he reinforced his insistence by slamming his hand on the table. The rickety folding table gave in without much resistance and the papers were strewn all over the ground. The staff corrected his glasses while he looked at the mess. I will have to ask you to leave. Minar is not interested in those who can't even wait in line. Angrily the hung grabbed the staff's collar and lifted him off the ground. And who are you to say that? Before anyone could react, a sharp spear point was hovering between the Adventurer King's eyebrows. Monique and her party were in charge of guarding the registration. He's an employee of Mina's March. And he is completely right. Now let him down and return into the cave you came from. You. The party also attempted to draw their weapons but halted when the spear tip made a jolt forward and hovered only millimeters away from their boss eyes. Carefully the Adventurer King put the staff back on the ground and lifted his hands. Leave. Minar does not need self-important rabble, no matter how strong they are. The reception was hurriedly put back in order and the registration continued. It was late in the night when James and Jess finally got their turn. The form was quite simple. One only needed to fill in their name, age, class, and level, and optionally their party name if they registered as a party. The exam will be held in 1 week. Be sure to come here on time. While the registration was going on, a different guest demanded Seth's presence. A dashing man with a wide-brimmed hat and a groomed handlebar mustache was led into a temporary office. Seth had sat down at the desk while Mary and Jane stood to the side in each corner. The man looked like a musketeer and struggled a little bit trying to sit in the chair with armrests. His rapier kept getting in the way and he ended up putting it in the inventory. I already mentioned it at the door, but I am the Vice Master of Delta's Adventurer Guild. Are you the Master of Minar? Yes, I am the Tower Master of Mina's March. What matter lead to the Vice Master visiting us today? As the organization in charge of the adventurers, I hope you understand that the guild would show interest in such a large-scale recruitment operation. I came to inquire about your plan concerning this exam you have been advertising. Seth nodded understandingly, but he had not much knowledge of the exam either. He had left this to the others. As such he looked to Mary and Jane to explain. Mary stepped to the desk and brought some paper out to show them. For the first test, the examinees would be split into those between Leave 20 and 30 and those above Leave 30. Those below Leave 30 would enter a multiple-layer dungeon with a member of Minar to judge their skills in the dungeon. Those above Leave 30 would enter a tournament to test their combat skills against humans, she said with a slight blush. That was the original plan. Seeing the number of examinees has left us in a slight pickle. The Vice-Master's face relaxed. He had been frowning a little when he heard the original plan until Mary mentioned that they had not expected this many people. What a fortune moment for the both of us. I have a proposal that will solve all our problems. The Vice-Master left after they came to an agreement. It was around the same time as Jess and James finished their application. Chapter 272. Mina's Bling. It was decided that the exam for Minar would be managed by a joint initiative of Minar and the Adventurer Guild. The Vice-Master had offered them a way to make it a great festivity. In exchange, they would split the proceeds. Seth wasn't really involved in the preparations for the exam. On one hand, he wanted to be entertained himself, and on the other, he had better things to do. Back in his smithy, he started working on Mina's accessories. The first item was a ring. He used a small part of epic-rated demonic gold. This was the product of rare-rated arcane gold being forged with the feasting ballad and left to absorb blood. The material was more durable than arcane gold and could use blood and miasma to recover its mana storage faster. The forging ballad he used for the simple band of reddish gold was a short ode devoted to Malfera. Malfera was a shadow demoness that found great joy in deceit and hidden death. She granted the effect of lowering one's presence and even obscuring the wearer from the view of others. The price was that she would be able to view the wearer during battles. She could grant even greater effects if she liked the wearer. But the effects could also be lowered if she didn't like the wearer's actions. On the ring, Seth put the complex circuit for hiding one's presence to strengthen the ballad's effects. The item was too small to fit a second enchantment. For the soul armament, Seth used the rare soul of an elite wraith he got as a drop from an undead dungeon. As much as he would have liked to harvest all these powerful souls, something kept preventing him from doing so in the dungeon. Even Al had no idea why he was prevented from forcefully ripping souls out of dungeon mobs, but she conjectured that it might be divine intervention. As a result, Seth could only hunt for the souls of invaders from other worlds. After some of Al's tinkering, they were able to spot the pathwork portals within the tower's range of influence and teleport there. The bigger problem was that these souls were not always useful, and it was hard to pass up the right moment to harvest them before the target died. Seth only had a few good souls from these excursions, and he decided to distribute those he didn't need among his followers. This was also the first serious test for the ink Allison had developed. An ink using the crushed nucleus of high-ranked undead. He had made sure that this one was made of the remains of the same wraith. At this point, the fact that size didn't matter for souls came in handy. After forging the soul into a ring, he could increase its perceived size and etch the runes onto it without any problems, the same way he had done it with circuits. The epic he inscribed was quite long and was also devoted to Malfera. But this one concentrated on her ability to grant invisibility. The price was the same as the forging ballad. His plan was to get 2 effects at the price of 1. The experimental ink he had gotten from Allison worked similarly to the traditional ones. The only difference was that instead of forming a darker enamel on the metal, the runes looked more like they were seared into the soul like a cauterized wound. It also took slightly more energy to infuse such armaments into the items, but it worked. As long as he described the results to Allison, and she kept researching, they would be able to make perfectly functional inks in the future. He dipped the small accessory into the water barrel and wasn't surprised at the synergy with his trait. This was what he had aimed for. Ring of Gyges. Relic. Durability, 790. 1 plus 5 to 15% mana regeneration. 2 wearers' presence is lowered by 55%. 3 wearers' opacity is lowered by 55%. 4 active skill, invisibility. 5 active skill, intangibility. 6 plus 700 mana. The rendition of a legendary ring that can grant the wearer absolute invisibility, made by Journeyman Smith with the assistance of Demoness Malfera. She will observe the wearer's actions when the ring is worn. Corresponding to her judgment, the effects may lower or increase. Once rumors of the ring's effects spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. With the assistance? So, he had actually drawn the attention of a demon. Looking at the skills, he saw why it was called a rendition. The Ring of Gyges granted perfect invisibility for an undetermined amount of time. Invisibility had its limits. Invisibility, cost, none, cooldown, 30 minutes. Grants invisibility for a duration of 30 seconds. The effect is lost when the user enters combat. Skill is activated by turning the ring to the left. But 30 seconds were enough to change the outcome of a battle. On top of that, there was another skill. It was probably because of the souls and ink he had used. Intangibility, cost, 700 mana, cooldown, 1h. Grants intangibility for a duration of 1 minute. The effect is lost when the user enters combat. Skill is activated by turning the ring to the right. Technically turning into a ghost for a minute. If the two effects were stacked, Mina could run through a battlefield without being seen or touched. But even without the skills, having her presence and opacity decreased by 55% was an overpowered effect for a shadow assassin/shadow mage like her. One ring to kill or escape them all, he thought sinisterly. The rest of her accessories were less spectacular as Seth lacked any good ballads to power them up. Instead, he went with quantity. He used Fey Steel to make a ring, a pendant, and an earring. With the uncommon souls from the Glow people, he pumped up with 20 of the common medium souls. Magician's Ring. Epic Arcane Set 1/3. Epic. Durability, 800. 1 plus 20% mana regeneration. 2 plus 70 int. 3 plus 20% chance for a random curse to be added to a magic attack. 4 plus 250 mana. Set effect. Plus 45% mana cost reduction. Plus 30% chant reduction. Plus 35% mana regeneration. An epic ring created by Journeyman Smith, as part of a set that would any magician salivate over. Its performances by unknown methods. All the set pieces had the same effects. This was the best Seth could do for now, as he had only 3 of these big souls left. Mina was not even a caster, but this set would work just fine until Seth could make her even better stuff. And at that point, they could give this set to one of the non-lord members of Mina's march. Since Nico was working on Mina's armor, he could finish her gear today. He looked at the clock and decided that this was enough for the day. He packed the jewelry into a small chest and put it in his inventory. As cool as it was to have a private vault, he preferred having these epic and relic gears in his inventory. Who knew if no, he would set a flag for this kind of event. Seth, his girlfriend tackled him as he entered the cafeteria. "You are back?" Seth asked and embraced her tightly. Mina and the others of Yule Cat's Fur had been inside a dungeon for the last 3 days. "Ah, hey. I didn't get to wash up yet. Don't hug me too tightly. You might get dirty." "I don't mind. We can wash up together then." "Humph. Could you guys do that somewhere else?" Mike asked, embarrassed. Even if the two were lovers, Mina was still his sister. "PFF, sorry. Finn is here too." "Don't ignore Finn," the fairy who had her entry stolen by the cat girl complained with pouting cheeks. It became a happy reunion. They ate together before Seth and Mina vanished to their private quarter to wash up together. Chapter 273. The Exam Preparation. "We are almost done setting up the dungeon pillars," a worker reported to the vice master. Jane stood to the side and watched the workers scramble around the stadium. "I would have never thought something like this was possible," she commented. "Well, the guild is not exactly going around bragging about this. Minar would take care of renting the stadium while the guild would take care of the adaptations for the exam. The guild would also take care of advertisements and other preparations. In exchange, 2/3 of the proceeds would go to them. It was the guild's proposal to turn the exam into a public event and sell tickets. The exam was changed in accordance. The proceedings were announced the day after the deal was made. The exam would be held over a span of 6 days. The first section would encompass all adventurers below Level 30. They could either enter solo, in a party, or make parties among each other. The first 3 days would be composed of fights against summoned monsters of increasing levels in the arena. The last 3 days would be the highlights, featuring duels between people above Level 40. First in parties and then 1v1 duels. The selling point of the event was that these could be duels to the death. With the guild's adaptations, the Colosseum would become a dungeon field, and the people could revive within the stadium in case they died. It would become a good publicity stunt for Minar on top of being able to find talents for the Oath Guard. Jane was glad that she could leave most of the work to the Adventurers Guild. She had more than enough to do managing the turquoise anvil. Besides lending their name, the prize, and spending some money, they had to do nothing. The prize in this case was not becoming part of the Oath Guard, but some epic equipment Seth had made during his experiments. With the changes, the exam details also changed. People could keep signing up for the tournaments and anyone had the chance to be scouted for the Oath Guard. Those who had already registered but did not want to compete in the public would go through the originally planned exam. This way they could also reduce the people Minar had to check on their own. But are you sure about putting up epic-rated items as the prize? Don't worry about it. The Tower Master said it's okay, so there won't be a problem. Minar. Totally not a problem. Since Seth didn't want to start on a different Lord's set, he started with making the prize items. He was still waiting for Nico Booz to assemble Mina's leather armor. He had only promised epic items, not how useful they would be. It was the perfect excuse to experiment with the rare bones of Seth and their random effects. Seth had not used a lot of it in these 3 months. The random effects made making good items from it too time-consuming. Looking for better donkeys or jackal blood was also an option, but it was hard to find dungeon beasts that counted as higher versions of those animals. He hoped that it would increase the chance for a better effect because only using better iron did not do the trick. As such, most of the oath armors were created with rare Olympian silver. He got the silver from the church for cheap and he was able to leave operating the magma furnace to Cerberus. As such, he had no scarcity of good, rare materials. To try for good effects, he made a bunch of simple greaves, bracers, and pauldrons using the reflective ballad. He would melt down the bad ones later and put the really good ones to the side to maybe use for the people of Minar later. The really good ones were effects that came at no cost or only cost mana almost like an enchantment, while the better ones had a cost similar to the mask he made for Jonah. The really bad ones had bad effects or bad effects that came at an even worse cost. As he kept making the same items to see what random effects they would get, a thought grew in his mind. Actually, it was an old idea that lifted its ugly head again. How nice would it be if he could leave this kind of stuff to Cerberus? Over the last months until he reached Leave 50, he had collected 7 AP he could distribute. His spirit smithy was Leave 5. He had enough ability points to level his skill up. Maybe Cerberus would become able to make items this time? For Seth, the question was whether to use the ability points to level up Soul Infusion or Spirit Smithy. In the end, he still decided on the latter, even if Cerberus would not be upgraded. Spirit Smithy was the one skill where he had no idea how to level it. All others he could grow with his actions. He decisively put the 7 AP into Spirit Smith, leveling it to Leave 6. Quickly a message window popped in front of him. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Quest, beat the Golem, 2. Difficulty, A. Cerberus gains greater freedom and is able to make items from your blueprint catalog on his own. It is limited to rare equipment and the resulting proficiency will be split with 30% going to the smithy's owner. With greater freedom comes a stronger will. Prove your superiority to convince Cerberus to keep working with you. To prove your superiority, you have to best the Golem in a contest of forging. Enter the forging arena, a place where only your skills matter, and create a better weapon than the Golem from the provided materials. Requirement: win against Cerberus 0/1. Rewards: permanently unlock affiliate Blacksmith. Do you accept the quest? Seth was surprised by the sudden prompt. It was similar to the quest he had to do to unlock Cerberus in the first place. A forging competition against the Golem? The difficulty was judged as A, so it would definitely not be easy, right? It didn't state any punishment for losing. The worst situation Seth could think of was losing his assistant. Was it worth it to risk Cerberus for the chance to have him constantly produce items? Probably. However, Seth was unwilling. But there was a small feeling telling him to do it. It wasn't his calculative side that kept weighing the pros and cons of a decision. He felt competitive. He had done a lot to grow his own skills. It was always in the back of his mind that he only got this far because of his equipment. In a logical way, he was aware that this didn't undermine the worth of the work he put into his skills. Everyone started at different points. He was not the only smith who worked with better facilities. But unconsciously, the quests asked him to prove his skills and he wanted to test them. He would prove that he was where he was not only because of his better class. He accepted the quest. In the next moment, he stood in a foreign workshop. There were 2 forges, 2 anvils. Everything was present twice and Cerberus stood at the other set of crafting stations. Ding! You can only use your skills and the provided tools and materials in this workshop. You have 10 hours to make a weapon of your choice from the materials provided. It meant what it said. Seth couldn't even wear any equipment. He was clad in a shirt, simple trousers, and a leather apron. He also couldn't use Karen's obol. He took a deep breath and looked at the materials provided. There were some he knew like dark steel or mithril. But also, some he had never even seen like hollow silver or grim brass. Most of the materials in the pile were rare, but there were also one or two epic ones. Heavy wagram, a metal with a yellow tinge. It was ungodly heavy compared to its size. It stuck out because it didn't fit the other epic materials on the table. All of them followed a theme like divinium, which was the crystallized blood of a blessed angel. There was also the exact opposite of this material called demonium, which was created from demonic blood. These made sense, but the metal he was even more interested in was necronite. A crystalline metal he had never even heard of. Necronite, crafting material, epic. A purple metal with a strong miasma of death. The crystallized blood of a tainted earth elemental. The metallic blood had taken on the wicked properties of the magic that denied the elemental eternal rest. Over a long time, it crystallized in an environment filled with miasma. This material immediately gave him an inspiration which he followed. The dings of metal made Seth look over to Cerberus. The golem had already started and was stoically forging a billet. Since this is a battle of skills, I will use everything I have. I will show you what I can do. Chapter 274. Ode to the Queen. To Seth, it was not a race against time. He stayed calm and closed his eyes to activate songwriting. The skill was able to help write a song based on the knowledge of the user. It could give suggestions to accomplish the desired effect. It could even be used to improve texts he knew or had already written. It was like an app for a challenged musician. And this was a test of his skills. He also wanted to use a song he wrote himself. His eyes burned with desire as he corrected and tested the song with the help of the skill. The workshop shook under the power of his voice as he rehearsed the demonic ballad. He could even feel the deep bass of his own voice, like the sound of huge speakers, return to his chest. Seth put the metal into the forge. Using his pyrokinesis, he added his soul flame and controlled the heat to the maximum. The material behaved like steel in the forge as it slowly reached forging temperature. When it got close to the perfect temperature, he even used the voice of Seth. With this, he could feel the power of the ballad growing as it bounced back and forth between the walls of the workshop. It even affected Seth, who fell into a trance with a manic smile on his lips. Despite his expression, his mind stayed calm as he grabbed the necronite and started forging it on the anvil. He was using a foreign hammer and a foreign anvil, but it didn't stop him. The droning ballad was now accompanied by the rhythmic hits of his hammer. Even energy circulation too fell into the rhythm of his song as it flowed through the hammer and strengthened the necronite with every strike. If the aura of the necronite was unholy, then the demonic power of the note he forged into the metal was atrocious. It was the first time Seth could really feel the connection between himself and the demon he was pleading for its blessing. This was the difference between just any ballad and one written by oneself. He could feel the gaze of her many multifaceted eyes rest upon him. In the back of his mind, he could even vividly imagine her figure. This demon overlord had no name. She was the queen. The queen of the swarm. And her attention was directed at him despite being in a quest space of the system. Seth didn't become nervous. On the contrary, his smile widened. This meant the effects of the ballad might end up outstanding. As the notes fused into the metal, its purple color kept turning darker and darker until it became black with a dark purple sheen. One by one he forged the billet of metal into armor plates. It was something he had already forged quite often, and he didn't plan for anything fancy. No, he even kept it simple on purpose. He heated the plates with his own fire and bent them to shape. With pins of dark steel he connected the many plates into a pair of simple but elegant gauntlets. With their smooth design and black color, they were reminiscent of the carapace of an insect, like that of a millipede. But it only looked this featureless on the outside. Since these were meant for a fist fighter, he installed the structure of a knuckle duster on the inside. The user would be unable to hold a weapon, but it would increase the damage compared to an ordinary gauntlet. With the last pin, his song finally fell silent. He looked up to a big clock on the wall between the two stations. He swiped the sweat off his forehead so it wouldn't run in his eyes. 5 of the 10 hours had already elapsed when he was done with the metal part. Seth took a deep breath and a huge swig from the water bottle provided at his station. Only when he started drinking, he realized how thirsty he had been. He looked over to Cerberus, where the hammer had also quieted down. The golem was sitting at a workbench hunched over whatever it had forged. Had it already started engraving its piece? Seth stretched and returned to the pile of materials and chose something called gloom step leather. He felt that he had heard the name Gloomstep somewhere before, which was why he chose it. The leather was quite soft and malleable despite its thickness. The pattern for leather gloves was already ingrained into him and he almost didn't need the help of blueprint. Ding! Your skill sewing, beginner, leave 9 has become sewing, adept, leave 1. The announcement surprised him when he had just finished the pair of gloves. He looked at the clock. More than an hour had passed. Looked down at the pair of gloves. He decided to make another one with his ranked up sewing. 8 hours and roughly 30 minutes had passed when he finally assembled the gauntlets completely. The soft leather felt good on his hand and would do a great job of protecting the hand and knuckles during punches. It seemed that Cerberus had finished his piece as he was simply standing beside his forge without moving. With more than an hour remaining, Seth started engraving enchantments. One enchantment he could not avoid was the automatic size adjustment. Seth engraved 2 complex circuits, one on each gauntlet. On the left gauntlet, he engraved the circuit of fear, and on the right, he engraved paralysis. Sweat was running in his eyes and the engraver became slippery in his hands. With just 5 minutes left on the clock, he finished his weapon. A wave of relief washed over him hearing the announcement that he had finished the item. Left glove of the swarm. Epic. Epic set 1/2. Damage, 570. Physical def, 648. Mag def, 345. Durability, 3200. 1 plus 30% overall increase to undead in the surroundings. 20% chance for a corpse in the surroundings to be revived as an undead subordinate. 3 plus 40 agility, 20 mana per minute. 4 plus 30 strength, 20 mana per minute. 5 auto size adjustment. 6 35% to inflict fear on hit, 20 mana per minute. 7 weaponless strikes deal 20% additional damage. A gauntlet made by the wicked journeyman smith. Set effect. The bees. No. Not the bees. Every hit with the gloves of the swarm has the chance to spawn a group of demon wasps that will attack and poison nearby enemies. Stings have a 10% chance to paralyze and 25% to inflict hysteria on an opponent. The effect needs to be charged by making sacrifices to the queen. Current charge, 2500/2500. Right glove of the swarm. Epic. Epic set 1/2. Damage, 570. Physical def, 648. Mag def, 345. Durability, 3200. 1 plus 30% overall increase to undead in the surroundings. 20% chance for a corpse in the surroundings to be revived as an undead subordinate. 3 plus 40 agility, 20 mana per minute. 4 plus 30 strength, 20 mana per minute. 5 auto size adjustment. 6 35% to cause paralysis on hit, 20 mana per minute. 7 weaponless strikes deal 20% additional damage. A gauntlet made by the wicked journeyman smith. Set effect. The bees. No. Not the bees. Every hit with the gloves of the swarm has the chance to spawn a group of demon wasps that will attack and poison nearby enemies. Stings have a 10% chance to paralyze and 25% to inflict hysteria on an opponent. The effect needs to be charged by making sacrifices to the queen. Current charge, 2500/2500. Seth was tired but quite proud of his work. But what was up with that flavor text? When had he turned wicked? He just tried to make the best and coolest he could. If he could ever find Necronite in the auction house, he would definitely reforge these and infuse a soul armament. These were the kind of gauntlets he imagined for Evie. They didn't end up as relics, but he couldn't really expect it without an infused soul. Still, the amount of experience he got for these was quite high, probably due to the new high-quality materials. The time finally ticked off. The quest has ended. The contestants are now to put their work pieces on the table for judgment. The crafting stations of the workshop had vanished and, in their stead, stood a table with 2 sections to put down the item they had made. Seth stepped forward and put the 2 gauntlets on the table. Cerberus also stepped forward and put a dagger on the table. The golem's weapon was like a fine work of art contrary to what one would expect from the Colossus. It was silvery in color with dark grey fragmental patterns in the metal. The enchantments were made with inlays of copper-colored metal. The handle was a maroon-colored root wood that fit the inlays and patterns on the blade. Star metal sliver. Epic. Damage, 870. Durability, 1700. 1 plus 25% damage on starry nights. 2 plus 25% damage in forests. 3 30% chance to cause blindness, 15 mana per minute. 4 wearer's presence is lowered by 25%, 25 mana per minute. A beautiful and elegant weapon from the deft hands of journeyman Cerberus. They stood there for a moment observing each other's weapons. The dagger was a really great work, it optimally used the properties of the materials to their fullest potential. It was a work that bore witness to the maker's experience. On the other hand, Seth's weapon was a testimony to his creativity. Although there were things that could be further improved, it was the weapon with higher potential in battle. Cerberus suddenly bowed to him. Seth reciprocated with a bow of his own out of respect. If he watched the golem make items in the future, he would be able to learn from its experience. Ding! You have successfully beaten Cerberus in a forging duel. He is now unlocked as an affiliate blacksmith. The challenge dimension slowly faded around the blacksmith and his golem until they finally stood in Minar's workshop again. The only thing that stayed were the items on the table in front of them. Chapter 275. Stumped. Seth looked down at the pair of gauntlets and the dagger. He could keep those? Why didn't the quest mention this? His heart started racing in excitement. He was actually able to keep the item he used his first own ballad on, and he got the dagger from a completely unlocked Cerberus on top of it. The dagger didn't fall back behind the item Seth normally made. Once he added a soul to these items, there was a high chance that they would become relics. The question was which souls to. Seth grabbed to edge of the table to catch himself. Fatigue had finally caught up with him. He looked up to the humongous golem who looked the same as ever. Thanks a lot for today. You should also get a rest with it. He unsummoned the golem and put the items in his inventory. Minar? To my private quarters, please. Seth appeared in the Tower Master's bedroom where Mina was already soundly asleep. He cleaned himself before snuggling you to the cat girl and falling asleep. Delta. Nico Booz was also sitting in his workshop until late at night. It's a shame I couldn't get the epic fabric despite even borrowing money. He thought. But who would have thought the interest on my debt would end up being a benefit itself? He had been heartbroken when he still ended up losing the auction. It was only later that he looked into the bag he was given by the blacksmith that he realized what he was given. In the bag were all the parts for an epic leather armor. As a tailor, he could easily imagine how the finished design would look in the end. Although it was not his taste, he had to admit the performance and elegance of the piece. Usually, something like assembling someone else's work was beneath him, but all the pieces were made of epic-rated material. His skill rank was originally not high enough to work with this kind of material yet, but most processing steps were already done. Like Seth had said, all he had to do was sew everything together with a corresponding thread, and anything past that could be left to the blacksmith. Considering he could not make an epic item on his own yet, being able to take part in making one would still give his proficiency a huge boost. Booz had spent the last day meticulously weaving shadow magic and managed to make 3 rolls of rare rated thread. It was the best he could do and used to fit in with the leather of the armor pieces Seth had given him. The tailor worked tirelessly until deep in the night. The reason was easy to understand. Nico Booz had been stuck at Adept Leave 9 for quite a while now and was desperate to reach the journeyman rank as soon as possible. It was simply agonizing for the protégé to keep treading on the spot and not being able to improve. But even just being part of making an epic item could be enough to get him to the next rank. And if it didn't, he would have to keep trying. The 2 other commissions Seth might have for turned out to be a small light of hope for the tailor, instead of a burden. In the early morning hours, he finally made the last stitches. It was not the first time he had worked this long, but he had never been this focused for such a long time. Nico Booz, who normally took meticulous care of his outer appearance, now sported a mane of unkempt hair and dark bags under his eyes. The horror of what he would have to do to fix this paled before his euphoria of having finished the task. There were still some steps left before they counted as finished items, but Nico was sure that he outdid himself with this. Now to get some sleep. He dragged his feet as he returned to his apartment above his store. He fell asleep the moment he touched the bed sheets and slept like a rock. Minar. A squirming Mina in his arms woke Seth from his slumber. Her big sparkling eyes stared up into his and he could read her thoughts. They enjoyed the morning together before giving the kitchen a visit. How about going to the city and having some fun, since you are free this week until the exams? Seth asked her over breakfast. Are you sure? You've been working a lot lately. That's exactly why a break will be great, Seth said with a smile. You too, a high-pitched yell surprised them. Mina and Seth are planning to do something together without Finn again. A teary third wheel crashed onto the table between them. Stop leaving Finn behind all the time. Oh no, they both thought. Yes. It was the dreaded secret weapon of the cute fairy. Throwing a tantrum. Her tiny fists pounded the table like a jackhammer while tears as big as her eyes kept pouring over her face and formed a puddle around her. Finn, listen. Mina tried to talk but stopped when Finn looked up to her. The pitiful look in her eyes as snot and tears mixed on the tiny brute's face. Her guilt game was strong. Mina looked to Seth seeking his assistance. It was true that he had not had much time to hang around with them. It was either him working or their party raiding a dungeon. He sighed but then smiled. This week before the exams might be a chance to make up some time. All right, how about this? Today the three of us go to the city together. We could give a visit to Nico Booz on the way. I wanted to see what progress he made with Mina's armor. And while we are there, we could ask him to make a robe for Finn. Although the fairy had calmed down a little, it was obvious that she was not satisfied, yet. And tomorrow I will spend a full day with Finn. We could go to an amusement park, or I could show you around the demon district. Yay, her cloudy face instantly became sunshine and sparkles. I will go and get ready. Seth could only look apologetically to Mina. They would have to spend their alone time later that week. She grasped his hands and squeezed. It's okay. My hero did it to save me from the tiny devil's mental attack, she joked. The three teleported to the church after getting ready. They wore casual clothes. Mina was hugging his right ATM and Finn was riding his right shoulder as they entered the crowded street. They visited a lot of stores and watched a movie in a cinema where Finn annihilated a whole maxi bucket of popcorn on her own. It had become afternoon when they finally got close to Nico Boo's fashion store. The mannequins in hero suits were as colorful as ever. There were a few people inside as they walked in. While Mina and Finn took their time to look around and check the more normal pieces, Seth went to ask a clerk whether Nico Booz was available. The owner didn't come today. She said with an embarrassed smile. Judging by your expression, that isn't normal. Did something happen to him? Seth asked, worried about his armor pieces. I'm sorry, customer, but why are you asking? If you allow me this question. I'm the Tower Master of Mina's March. I left a commission with him and came by to see his progress. Ah. Please, wait. I will try to call the owner again. She went to the back, but Seth could hear her hushed voice. Mr. Booz. What? Yes. I am sorry, but somebody asked for your presence. He said he's the Tower Master of Mina's Mar and came to get an update on his order. Well, yes, I will. She came back to the counter with a business smile. I'm sorry for the wait. Mr. Booz will arrive shortly and hopes you could wait for him for a moment. She had barely finished speaking when a disheveled-looking tailor rushed in from the direction of an unassuming door in the back of the showroom. Seth. All heads turned in the direction of Nico Booz, who resembled a ruffled peacock compared to his usual appearance. His face slowly turned red when he saw everyone look at him with a surprised expression. He gestured for Seth and his people to follow him and hurriedly vanished through the same door. Thank you for your effort, Seth said goodbye to the clerk and followed through the door. Chapter 276. Spending time with the family. Mina and Finn followed, and they entered the workshop area. There was not much in the sense of crafting stations except some abandoned sewing machines. Except for the place where Nico seemed to usually work, everything was either filled with shelves of fabric or all kinds of dress forms and mannequins with finished or half-finished pieces of clothing. Mina and Finn immediately started exploring the place and inspecting the yet-to-be-released clothes. The tailor sat down on a comfy-looking chair and slumped like a puppet with its strings detached. How did you know? He asked Seth, who had followed him instead of checking the workshop. Know what? He asked, perplexed. That I finished the armor just this morning. I haven't slept for more than a few hours in the last 2 days because I was working on your armor, the tailor complained. I mean, that's great, but you really should look after yourself a little more. I only came by because I had the chance. I didn't expect anything this soon. Seth patted the hard-working tailor and brought out a potion. Here, try drinking this. It's a potion made by our little witch. It helps the body to slowly recover from fatigue and overwork. It's no instant cure, but also puts a lot less stress on your body. Nico looked at the potion with a little suspicion but ended up drinking it anyway. It had a refreshing taste like citrus, and he could feel the tension and fatigue in his body be alleviated. It didn't substitute for a good night's sleep, but he felt a lot better. Thanks. Shall we get to business then? The tailor asked and lined up the almost finished armor pieces on the table before Seth. A form-fitting top covered with a few hardened reinforced leather plates to protect vital areas, similar leather pants, a pair of gloves, a pair of hardened leather bracers, and a pair of soft, slender boots. What they all had in common was that they looked almost featureless. The snake leather they were made of now actively absorbed light, making them look like shapes cut from the night. They even had a halo of shadow around them. All that's left is for you to finish the leather working. Before the two crafters had realized it, there were already two pairs of marveling eyes caught by the unfinished items. It's like a hole in the table. Finn mumbled and kept touching the bracers to make sure there was something there. Mina similarly had to pick up the gloves to make sure it was real. The two crafters could only watch them and smile wryly at their innocence. Finish them, Mina suddenly said with a sparkle in her eyes. Her big eyes felt like floodlights as she looked at him with expectation. And now? Yush, both Finn and Mina suddenly answered. You guys. Seth stopped speaking when he saw that Nico had the same expectant look on his face. Why were they in such a hurry? He nodded and got to work. He used Nico's stuff to finish the leather work. Yes. 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 Nico started jumping up and down like a maniac every time Seth finished one of the pieces. Like a gambler who kept getting the right numbers in the lottery. After Seth finished the gloves, boot, and bracers, the tailor suddenly fell into a triumphant cheer. I'm finally a journeyman tailor, he shouted with tears of joy. Areem, congrats, I guess. Seth said a little baffled. Mina and Finn had a hard time following the conversation. Oh, thanks. I hope you don't mind if I leave you alone for a moment, he said and rushed out of the workshop. The moment the door closed behind him, they could hear his muffled cries of joy. Since he's gone, I will really finish these. Once he was done with the pants and the top, Seth summoned his spirit smithy inside the tailor's workshop. Since the items were already ready, it would not take too long to forge the soul armaments. The soul for Mina's armor had been prepared a long time ago. It was one of the few big hauls Seth had managed to make when they hunted for souls to harvest. One day, when checked a portal that had been detected by Mina's Mar, they came across a big group of dark elves. Now, these were not the nice kind of busted dark-skinned beauties one knew from some novels. These were elves corrupted by dark magic, maybe even under the influence of an evil god? Who knew? However, they attacked them on sight, and they were forced to kill them off. During and after this fight, Seth had managed to harvest several souls. Two of these were of assassin classes, one being a rogue and the other also being a shadow assassin. These souls were originally rare-rated and medium-sized, but Seth managed to increase them to big with only a few more medium-sized souls. Seth divided the assassin's soul into 4 parts for the top, the pants, and the boots. The rogue's soul was also divided into 4 pieces for the pair of bracers and gloves. The idea behind it was simple. Shadow assassins are known for their agility and speed to kill in an instant. Using this soul on the body armor and boots could optimize the options the soul was expected to bring. Same with the other soul. Rogues were a class that was more apt in setting traps and directly fighting with short and hidden weapons. Using it for the gloves and arm guards could increase Mina's fighting power. As for the enchantments, Seth chose some more special ones. The pants were engraved with the complex circuits for leap and strength. On the boots, he used featherfall and agility. He fortified the top with a circuit of shield and one for reflect. He put dexterity and intelligence into the gloves, while the bracers were enchanted with endurance and strength. The reason Seth often chose these flat attribute increases was that they had no influence on other effects or enchantments. They were neutral. All that was left now, was infusing the soul armaments. And when he finally finished them. Ding! Your skill Blacksmith, Journeyman, Leave 7 has become Blacksmith, Journeyman, Leave 8. Ding! Your skill Enchantment, Journeyman, Leave 7 has become Enchantment, Journeyman, Leave 8. These two had finally leveled up. And the resulting armor was great, too. Midnight Jacket. Epic Midnight Set 1/8. Epic. Physics Defense 1200. Mag Defense, 860. Durability, 2480. 1 plus 50% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 15% overall power in darkness. 3 plus 30% protection from leather armor. 4 plus 40% evasion. 5 shadow-related skills are strengthened by 20%. 6 reflect up to 25% of incoming damage. 7 shield blocks up to 500 damage. 150s to regenerate if broken. A body armor that was made in collaboration between Journeyman Booz and Journeyman Smith. Made from the leather of a special snake, it looks like a piece cut from the darkness. Mystic techniques have imbued it with effects any professional killer would envy. Set effect: 4/8, glove and bracers. Weapon masteries are increased by 1 level. Cutthroat. Melee damage is increased by 75%. 4/8, boots and trousers and top. Shadow-related skills are strengthened by 2 levels. Shadow. Any damage is increased by 200% as long as the target is not aware of your presence. 8/8. Shadow. Cutthroat. I shall wear midnight. Turn everything in a radius of 15 meters into a field of total darkness. The user's existence is completely hidden. Midnight trousers. Epic midnight set 1/8. Epic. Physics defense 800. Mag defense, 660. Durability, 2150. 1 plus 50% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 15% overall power in darkness. 3 plus 30% protection from leather armor. 4 plus 30% evasion. 5 shadow-related skills are strengthened by 20%. 6 plus 40 strength. 7 active skill, leap. A pair of trousers that was made in collaboration between Journeyman Booz and Journeyman Smith. Made from the leather of a special snake, it looks like a piece cut from the darkness. Mystic techniques have imbued it with effects any professional killer would envy. Set effect: collapsed. Active skill / toggle, leap, no cost / 100 mana per minute, cooldown, 120 / none. This skill can either be used for no cost with a duration of 30 seconds or can be toggled by consuming the user's mana. When active, the user can jump up to 4 times higher. Midnight Paw, right. Epic midnight set 1/8. Epic. Physics defense 600. Mag defense, 460. Durability, 2000. 1 plus 50% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 15% overall power in darkness. 3 plus 30% protection from leather armor. 4 plus 50% sneaking. 5 shadow-related skills are strengthened by 20%. 6 plus 40 agility. 7 passive skill, featherfall. 8 plus 15% movement speed. 1 of a pair of soft boots that were made in collaboration between Journeyman Booz and Journeyman Smith. Made from the leather of a special snake, it looks like a piece cut from the darkness. Mystic techniques have imbued it with effects any professional killer would envy. Set effect: collapsed. Passive skill, featherfall, 15 mana per second. Turns the user's fall into a gentle floating like the fall of a feather. Midnight Claw, right. Epic midnight set 1/8. Epic. Physics defense 600. Mag defense, 460. Durability, 2000. 1 plus 50% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 15% overall power in darkness. 3 plus 30% damage with short, bladed weapons. 4 plus 20% damage in melee combat. 5 combat-related skills are strengthened by 30%. 6 plus 40 dexterity. 7 plus 40 intelligence. 1 of a pair of gloves that was made in collaboration between Journeyman Booz and Journeyman Smith. Made from the leather of a special snake, it looks like a piece cut from the darkness. Mystic techniques have imbued it with effects any professional killer would envy. Set effect: collapsed. Midnight bracer, right. Epic midnight set 1/8. Epic. Physics defense 600. Mag defense, 460. Durability, 2000. 1 plus 50% affinity with darkness. 2 plus 15% overall power in darkness. 3 plus 30% damage with short, bladed weapons. 4 plus 20% damage in melee combat. 5 combat-related skills are strengthened by 30%. 6 plus 40 endurance. 7 plus 40 strength. 1 of a pair of bracers that was made in collaboration between Journeyman Booz and Journeyman Smith. Made from the leather of a special snake, it looks like a piece cut from the darkness. Mystic techniques have imbued it with effects any professional killer would envy. Set effect: collapsed. Mina stared at the finished armor pieces with the intensity of the sun. Especially after she heard what they were able to do. There was no way Seth could pack them up here and give them to her later. You know, originally I wanted to surprise you guys with your stuff all at the same time. The cat girl's eyes didn't move even an inch away from the gear and they glared when he tried to take them away. He had to be strong. I love you, but you will get your full set at the same time as everyone else. He fought of Mina's puppy eyes and packed away the armor. Chapter 277. Little Demon. Delta. Overall, the sorceress had become a lot calmer and more satisfied. Yeah, I had the same thought. Seth agreed and told Finn their assumption. They agreed to take a look at the scroll when they returned home. As for the 2 poetry books, they were collections of poems of fellow demon bards. They could be hit or miss, but from what Seth read they were promising. It wouldn't be a big loss, even if they didn't hold any overwhelming texts. All it cost him was a guest ring. He had made quite a few to identify the people acknowledged by their organization. Like the rings that were given to the lords and employees, they could react with the other rings to validate their authenticity. For the rest of the day, the 2 explored the demon district. Finn especially liked the parts where everything was overgrown like an ancient ruin. The residents were more like nature spirits than demons. The streets were narrow paths between fields of flowers and small herbs. Even Seth had only found this place recently after Ember had brought him here. It was also a good place to find exotic alchemy and potion ingredients. They stared in this part for the longest and had a very exotic but good meal. Later the day they ended up in a pub where Finn got terribly drunk. The fairy brute found a bunch of bulky and dangerous-looking demons playing an otherworldly but fun-looking game. It involved 6 floating dice, a colorful card game, and a talking frog. In a matter of minutes, she started gambling like a pro. She was ripping them off in this game she supposedly had never played before. The demons could not do much more than watching her take their money. Even if they wanted to stop, the fairy didn't allow them. The Victi demons had learned their lesson very fast. They had accused her of cheating after the first few games. When they picked a fight with the intoxicated fairy to get their money back, they had their leader pummeled to the ground and relieved of everything down to his underwear. The originally red demon was radiating in 50 shades of green and blue. Having asserted her dominance, none of the demons was allowed to leave until she had completely emptied their pockets. Seth had kept in the background silently drinking his beer. Drunk Finn was scary, like a completely different person. He kept watching the spectacle until the fairy fell asleep from too much alcohol. Only then did he pick her up and got on his way home. It was simply easier than trying to deal with a drunk Finn. The sleeping fairy on his palm had rolled into a ball and was a lot cuter than her drunk self. Seth saw her lips moving as if she was talking in her sleep. With a smile, he lifted her up to his ear to understand what she was mumbling. Nom nom, gimme all your money, Enja. Don't you try to mess with me. I will $% number you and everything you. Not so cute anymore. His face fell and he stopped listening for his own peace of mind. He hurried back to Mina's Mar to drop off the ticking time bomb before the raving drunkard woke up. Chapter 278. The Lords of Mina's Mar. Hey, it's been a while since you joined us in sparring. Monique said excitedly when Seth entered the training room. Seth greeted Mike, Monique, Jonah, and Tekker who were currently refining their combat skills. It had really been a while. During the last 3 months, he had stayed at the Bard College most of the time, the only exceptions were the few dungeon excursions to level up. He wanted to use the free time before the tournament to spend more time with them, too. Seth also wanted to get to know their new skills better. Everyone had taken up a second class and he wanted to talk about their equipment one last time before finalizing the designs. Like Mina, Mike, Tekker, and Monique would get a completely new set of gear. It would be the last full overhaul for the time being. It was paramount for it to fit them. Oh, that's great, let me go first. I have been waiting for a chance. Mike said with burning eyes that made Seth shrink back. He had always known that Mike was very protective of his sister and had a skewed image of her in his head. Since he and Mina were officially a couple, Mike had turned out to be a bit more than just overprotective. Seth had barely to equip his gear before a terrifying blade came flying at him. You goddamn siskin. Wait for the signal, he cursed and evaded the sword aura by mere millimeters. Don't worry. They can put you together in the infirmary. Just let me vent a little. Mike said with a crazed undercurrent. Seth donned his full gear and blocked Mike's sword stroke with his wyvern shield. The barrier on the shield immediately broke and the weight behind the strike made him almost fall over. The level difference was too great for the shield's effect to affect Mike. D-Dragon Might, the skill that could anyone on a lower level kneel, only slightly slowed Mike's movements. Still, Mike was too fast. Before Seth could react, the next strike was blocked by auto shield. 10 shields layered on top of each other to block the weapon with 9 being broken. Mike was level 65 and did not lag behind in attributes thanks to the blessing. A difference of 15 levels was hard to overcome. Especially against Mike, who had put a lot of effort into training. In aura, he had been a swordsman. When he reached level 50, he had gotten the rare class Focus Warrior as a second class. It increased the power of skills that focused energy into weapons. It powers up the willpower and increased resistance against mind attacks. Seth blocked Mike's blade with the wyvern blade and almost lost grip of his weapon. The second class wasn't all there was to Mike. His original swordsman class had also evolved to the epic class Sword Demon. This class was similar to the class Sword Saint and could only be attained with talent and hard work put into a specialized weapon class. As the name suggested, all skills related to the sword and fighting with it were tremendously strengthened. In exchange, any other weapon was weakened. Seth had to use both hands to prop up the shield and block an aura stab from Mike. Especially these energy skills became a lot stronger with the epic class. There was no way for Seth to fight back with just his weapon mastery. Okay, Mike, this is enough. The Catman was a little bummed but stopped attacking. At least let me hit you once. You should be glad you didn't get through the shields. I have no idea what would happen if you struck my armor and got cursed. He had instinctively donned his full set when Mike suddenly attacked. Usually, he would not wear the wyvern cuirass during a spar. The curse that could accompany the reflected damage could be quite terrifying. It was common sense not to use this kind of stuff in a sparring match. My turn. Monique said joyfully and shooed Mike away with a playful kick. Fighting Monique was quite similar to his fight with Mike. Except that she was more controlled. Her usually cheerful demeanor turned serious when she focused on a fight. A description like Focus Warrior fitted her fighting style much better. She would block and counter with high precision and use aura attacks like a scalpel. The explosive beauty had kept her Turtle Warrior class, but her second class was also Spear Demon, with the same foundation as Sword Demon. Her strikes were hard and easily decreased the durability of Seth's items. Unlike Mike, she had a formal education in martial arts and an obvious talent. Despite her lower level, she was more dangerous than the Catboy. But she also held back a lot better, so her fight with Seth seemed much more balanced, giving the blacksmith more time to observe her power. Okay, I think it's enough. Monique smiled and gave way for the last contestant. Tekker, the most special among the lords. He was the definition of I don't want to get hurt, so I'll max out my defense. This man, this big, hulking colossus of a man, had not only chosen the unique class the Keep, which gave him 25% resistance to literally everything, free points in endurance, increased defense per attribute points, and a bunch more in exchange for no attack power or taunt skills. No, this wasn't enough. As second class he chose was the Bastion. A unique class that added barrier skills based on his defense, increased his defense when he didn't move, share his defense, and gave him the trait to get more defense the heavier his armor was. He still had no possibility to attack or gain aggro. But the amount of defense he gained like this was ludicrous. Like a moving fortress. Seth attacked Tekker with the wyvern blade for a full 15 minutes without being able to break the defensive barrier under the debuff of the Black Knight armor. In the end, it became a competition between Seth, Mike, Jonah, and Monique to break Tekker's barrier. Jonah couldn't do it without bringing himself to the brink of death. The two demons managed to pierce it after a few minutes. Seth couldn't do it with just weapons and needed to resort to fire magic. It was not too hard to break through with a fire lance. But they all needed to consider was, that Tekker still only wore a rare armor set and 2 epic shields. How terrifying would the man become once he had a relic tier armor? He wouldn't be able to do damage, but the amount of damage he would be able to stop. If their party ever experienced a wipe in a dungeon, Tekker and Evie might end up being the only ones alive. Actually, he might be the only one alive, as Evie would be undead. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. Monique suggested after everyone got to test their skills on Tekker's iron defense. Over the meal, they finally got the chance to talk about their equipment. Mike's focus was on a sword. A sword among swords. An ultimate sword. Seth had to make him stop using the word swords. As for the armor, he was okay with anything that didn't get in the way of his movements. Tekker was similar. An armor. An armor among armor. The heaviest armor there could be, and so on and so forth. There was no need for a weapon, but he wanted bigger and heavier shields, go figure. Monique was the only normal one. She was satisfied with her spear for now and only asked for a light plate armor or maybe a mix of plate and chain mail. None of them had any opinion for their accessories and subsequently left that headache to Seth. In a similar manner, Seth spent the rest of the week with the founding members of Mina's Mar he usually didn't get to see all the time. Not just to get a better idea of their wishes for their equipment, but also because he didn't want them to drift apart. What was the point of making a guild if they didn't get closer to each other? He spent some calm hours with Bulko and Otto the pharmacist in the herb garden he and Allison had grown. Bulko had become a high priest and mirror cleric. The first was what one would expect. Strong healing spells and buffs. The second was a little more special. The mirror cleric could mirror statuses and skills. For example, he could copy the skill a mage had just used, but he could also copy a buff he just cast himself for a fraction of the cost. This also worked with enemy skills. The copies would not be as powerful as the original but could be cast instantly within a short time after the original was activated. All of this was very cost intensive, so the biggest concern of the big man was his mana pool. An unexpectedly fun time was spent with Lixis. The half-elven mage had taken a liking to Earth's modern vehicle and made the party follow her to drive go-karts. They ate and talked in Delta. Lixis had managed to become a multi-element mage focused in fire and wind while she got the chance to become an elven elementalist for her second class. Unsurprisingly, her concern was affinities with the elements and increased magic power. She didn't need a new robe as she still had the one Seth had given her. After her talent as an elementalist shown, she was allowed to enter the elven community. There Lixis had found an elven enchanter who finished the robe for her. All Seth needed to be concerned about were making a staff and jewelry for the half-elf. The rest of the week up to the tournament he finally spent with Mina alone. Chapter 279. The Tournament. Jess and James had prepared as best as they could. The change of the exam to a public event had come as a surprise, but the two adventurers decided to join anyway. Not because they thought they were able to win and get a piece of epic equipment. The two wanted to go after the prizes for the lower seats. The top 5 got epic items and the top 10 would still get a rare item. The top 20 could get a set of potions. And everyone in the top 50 would get a coupon for the turquoise anvil. If they managed to get into the top 50 it might enable them to buy a rare item in the future. They had spent the week farming materials in the dungeons. They knew it was futile to try and increase their leveling in such a short amount of time, but with the additional money, they were able to improve their equipment. It was nothing fancy, they couldn't get anything fancy even if they wanted to. But it wasn't too shabby either. They had spent more time than money on haggling and researching their gear. James wore a mix of plate and mail armor. Everything he wore was centered on the chain mail they had once dropped in the dungeon. It was an uncommon drop called Glimmer of Chivalry. It allowed him to multiply his defense when protecting one other female party member. With this, he could play the role of an off-tank despite the rest of his gear being more centered around improving his attack capabilities. Jess similarly had an uncommon set of rings that gave her the option to store mana over the day and recover her full mana pool in an emergency. This enabled her other equipment to be a mix that of attack, evasion, and additional mana regeneration. It increased her survivability instead of being a glass cannon like other mages. The venue of the tournament was the Delta Stadium. A huge structure that had been used for international sports festivals like the Wonder Games. It had been a refugee camp during the early days of the catastrophe when dungeons and portals went rampant. This was the first official event ever since the district had calmed down with the entrance of the Krna Empire. There were 2 lines at the stadium. One was the audience waiting to get in or buying tickets at the counter. The other was the reception for participants. The masses of people surrounding the stadium clogged up the streets for miles. Several thousand contestants and several 100,000 viewers were slowly filling the rooms and ranks of the stadium. It reminded James of the past. When things were normal. If he just ignored the various kinds of weird magic equipment some among the crowd wore. He could not have imagined this a year ago. When they were struggling with random monster invasions and dungeon breaks. When the volcano would rumble every day and their only choice was to either die in the wilderness full of monsters or a city full of monsters that had an active volcano looming over it. James wondered. Who would have thought they could back to days where a crowd of excited people was mingling in public without the fear of a monster suddenly popping out of thin air? This had all started as a simple recruitment for a clan. The Adventurer Guild joined in. The church joined in. Even the Empire and the leadership of Delta did not stay away from the spectacle. Jess and James finally reached the reception counter where they showed their proof of registration and got a slip of paper that showed they were participants. Thanks to their level being below 35 they managed to join the PvE tournament. It was dubbed like that because participants competed by fighting monsters with increasing levels. A lot of people would not have joined if the guild didn't assure everyone's safety. Not only could they revive, they were even offered to repair their equipment for cheap before and in between the rounds. They had just passed the counter when they heard a commotion in the back. "Get out of my way! Do you not know who I am?" A bulky man was making his way through the crowd like an icebreaker. "Oh no! It's that guy again!" Jess moaned in annoyance beside him. "Well, it's the price for increasing the scale," James commented resigned. "But what is he even doing here? Isn't he in the PvP tournament?" she asked, but James could only shrug his shoulders. With the exam becoming a public tournament CO administered by the Adventurer Guild, Minar's original ban of some unruly people was lifted. The overbearing Adventurer King had registered on the same day that it was open for everyone. The couple hurried to the participant quarters. They really didn't want to get involved with this guy or his party, was what they thought. "Why am I assigned to the same break room as the low-level scum?" the burly man ranted to one of the guild officials who was sweating and trying to explain that there was a mistake with his application. This was an impromptu decision because there was no place anywhere else. They could only fix it after the next round. The king and his party didn't seem to notice, but James could see a small smile around the corners of the staff's eyes. This was definitely not a mistake. Had Minar used their influence to mess with this guy? James was all for getting back at the man, but why did they have to suffer for it? In tacit understanding, nobody in the room spoke a word for the time they stayed. Nobody wanted to give the angry elephant in the room a reason to pick a fight with them. Shortly before the round started, the bull and his party were led away. For better or worse, everyone was able to make a sigh of relief when the first round finally started. Their nervousness before the start of the tournament was suppressed by the tension they had felt confronted by the very real possibility of leaving the stage before even entering it. Fighting a monster was better than being in a room with an agitated tyrant. Like gladiators, they entered the stadium through a row of big gates. Barriers split the stadium into several hundred fields where they would face off against the monsters. All participants had entered the stadium for the entrance ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to this very special event. It is the first of its kind here on Earth and hopefully not the last. Before I continue, how about a thundering applause for our brave contestants?" The voice of an announcer echoed in the stadium and was followed by several 100,000 cheers. The adventurers in the arena were stunned. Big screens in the stadium showed close ups of them. It became hard to breathe in the rush of claps. He had never seen so many people at once. All their eyes were on them. Jess gripped his hand hard, bringing him back to the present. He, too, clenched her hand tightly. "It's great that everyone is so motivated. I will now explain this competition. In the next 3 days, these valiant people currently in the arena will take part in the first half of this event. In these next 3 days, we will see them fight otherworldly beasts of increasing levels to prove their skill. The latter 3 days will be a PvP tournament involving the participants above Level 35. You can look forward to duels involving some of the strongest adventurers of Delta. Please don't despair if you did not get a ticket for the full length of the event. Everything will be aired live on TV and crystal screens in all public spaces. The rules of today are simple. The participants have to defeat the opponents that will appear in their field. What tricks, skills, items, or pets they use is up to them. As the well-informed spectators may know, the level range for this part of the competition is 25 to 35. To make sure everyone gets a chance to show their true skill, the guild has prepared opponents of up to level 40. The presenter made a short pause to give people time for processing the information, and there were a few oohs and ahs audible in the stadium. It was already quite a challenge to fight creatures at the same level as oneself. It would be undeniable proof of their strength if the participant really managed to slay creatures several levels above their own. But what is there to win? The guild Minar has sponsored 5 epic items for the TOP5, 10 rare items for places 6 to 15, 25 sets of rare potions for the TOP20, as well as 50 coupons for the turquoise anvil as prize for the top 50. The winner will be able to commission a personal item from Minar. Although only the last 50 can win a prize, there is no need to lose hope. As this originally started as the recruitment exam of Minar, anyone who proves their skill can be scouted by them. On top of that, any participant can get a certificate of participation as proof of their performance. They may even ask for footage of their fights. These are backed by the guild and can also be used to ask for an adjustment in adventurer rank. Murmurs filled the audience and the participants. This was new. A first. It felt like a report card for adventurers. It was official as even the guild recognized these results. Some of the participants that had pulled out started to regret it. Why? Minar was not the only guild. Even if those guys currently participating were not scouted by them, they could use a good result to apply with other guilds and clans. Even if they were not the best in the tournament, having definite proof vs someone that still needed to be tested was an advantage. A small number also talked about the adjusted prizes. Without further ado, let's start this event. The adventurers not part of the first round returned inside while the others found their fields by following the instruction on the paper they got at the reception. Jess and James were among the first group of participants in the first round. In the first round, they would need to fight against 3 monsters at level 25, 26, and 27 respectively. They were not sure how exactly the monster would enter the field until suddenly a portal opened. 2 tall figures jumped out before it closed again. They were gnolls. A mix of hyena and man standing at almost 2 meters. One was a shaman, the other a warrior. It matched their own party. The fight was not really hard. Even though they looked monstrous, humanoids had not too much of an advantage against human adventurers when it came to power. With the level advantage, they had easily overpowered the duo. They took a breather and could see that everyone else was also fighting gnolls similar to theirs. They had not much time to watch as the portal opened again and they got ready to face their next opponent. Chapter 280. The Tournament, 2. In a cinema dimension sat a bunch of people with Hades, Hephaestus, and Seth sitting in the prime seats. They were flanked by a huffy faceless magician in a catchy robe and another faceless figure in a brown old robe. I really like what you built here. I normally only get to see cinemas after humanity got overrun by monsters, the figure in the brown robe wondered. I'm glad you like it, Hades said amicably. The robe talking was the god of dungeons. He and Hades had a rather good relationship as both their businesses focused mainly on what happened below the earth. Much of the dungeon business also couldn't really work without the permission of gods of death like Hades. The dungeon god was in the good books of most of them. I have to admit, what you put together this time could be quite entertaining, the system god acknowledged the trio's idea. It's not just our work. Without the dungeon god actively nudging the guild into the right direction, this couldn't have happened. Hades gave credit to the proudly nodding robe. It was the dungeon god's interference that made the guild move and allowed for the tournament to work the way it did. But I have to say, isn't it a little boring with just these monsters? The system god asked. Monsters like gnolls or skeleton knights were not really a big obstacle for people in a similar level range. Why are you guys smiling so creepily? Just wait for the second round. You will see. Hephaestus said mysteriously with a knowing smile. Delta Stadium. The first round was no problem for Jess and James. With more than 5 levels difference there was no way for them to lose. Other people had it a little harder, especially those in parties without a big level advantage. They understood why parties were allowed in the end, they didn't bring any advantage as the opponent mirrored them. Worst case, the mobs had actually a better teamwork compared to some of the makeshift parties. The round is scheduled for the evening. We have 2 hours of free time. Jess said with a smile. The first round had already kicked out over 100 participants just in their bracket. We could visit the blacksmith and have our equipment repaired. James mused and got poked by Jess. I meant we could go and eat something together. I heard it's free for participants. Oh. Yeah, let's do that after dropping off our equipment. Jess nodded a little unwillingly but understood his point. Their gear was not damaged too badly, but it was better to be early. There was a long line at the counter to the blacksmith. It felt like a check room in a club or restaurant. The line was moving moderately fast, so they didn't have to wait long to get closer to the counter. It only became really weird when they could finally get a look at what was happening. The people were not simply dropping off their gear and getting a slip to get it back later. They would put their items on the counter where a tall, muscular man with black hair took them only to return them a minute or two later. No matter what crossed the counter, it was returned just moments later. Hello, you two. How can I help you? He said with a bright smile and leaned on the counter. James handed him his sword and shield. Although the monsters in the first round were no problem for them, the gnoll shaman had buffed up the warrior who made some dents in his shield. And the skeleton priest they faced second had cast a spell of weapon destruction on his sword. It was not a lot of damage, but the next rounds would only get harder. It was better to go in prepared. I see most of your items are well used and cared for. That's good. Wait a moment. They didn't really get a chance to answer before the blacksmith vanished. And he returned before they could really think about what he had said. The man came back with a fully repaired shield and a new sword. Here's your shield. But your sword is actually more damaged than it looked. It may take a while to repair. I hope it's okay to give you a substitute until I repaired your sword. The substitute sword had exactly the same length as his old one, but it felt much better balanced. He wasn't used to the hilt, but it felt more comfortable in his hand. He did a few test swings and felt like he would rather keep the substitute instead of getting his own sword back. James took the sword, shield, and a token to get his original sword back before Jess pulled him off to grab a meal. Why do you keep doing that? They are nothing special. Al complained about Seth's action. The reason the repair was cheap was that the Tower Master himself was doing the work. Of course, nobody outside of Minar knew. He had a few reasons. The biggest was that he could use Al to scan through the participants that came by and make a judgment based on their stats, skills, and titles. Like he just had, he would help the promising ones by upgrading their gear a little bit. Al was grumpy because Seth had his own idea about the promising ones. Even if they were ordinary, if he took a liking to them or they showed other qualities, he would help a little. He had liked the air between the couple just now, and their gear was very well maintained. People who were meticulous with their gear would live longer in this business, is what Tord used to say. Seth did it on a whim, but it was also a way to mark promising ones and a test of character. Nobody would force the man to bring back the better substitute, but if he did, he would have much higher chances to be scouted. On the contrary, those who wouldn't bring it back would drop out of the selection. No matter how strong their skills or rare their classes were. It took longer than they thought for the first round to end, but it wasn't bad. They could watch the show and eat for free. The variety and ways how others dealt with the opponents were surprising. But it was inevitable that most of the people would be eliminated during this first round. The biggest part of participants was made up of parties that reached the bare minimum to register. Many of these were not well-attuned teams, but a bunch of individuals who thought their chance to get further would grow in a party. Those people had it the hardest against the teams of monsters that would spawn to match their numbers. A good team was more than just the sum of its members. And the summoned creatures were a good team, unlike most adventurers. Even when they summoned their pets, the lacking cooperation broke their neck more often than that it helped. The most interesting were the few parties and people that managed to pull through even against opponents of a higher level. There was an Leave 25 solo adventurer who managed to defeat a gnoll, a skeleton warrior alone. Even a 3-level higher hobgoblin died once he worked together with his pet. A kind of lightning wolf that could stun and burn enemies. Another good example was a typical well-balanced dungeon party. A swordsman class, a tank, a mage, a healer, and a thief. Individually they were nothing special, but they excelled in teamwork and got through the first round as one of the few parties. There was something even more attention-grabbing than the matches for the two adventurers. Once in a while, there would be masked figures at the edges of the arena, watching the matches close up. Jess and James had not noticed them at first, but the longer they watched the more suspicious they seemed. Sometimes they would talk with the overseers of the guild and leave just to appear at a different field in the stadium. Jess was extremely curious who these people were, as no one except for guild personnel and the participants were allowed in the arena. Maybe they are the scouts of Minar. James pondered. But why hide their faces? She asked back. Privacy maybe? I can imagine it would be rather annoying if people kept bothering them in their free time for a chance to enter Mina's march. Figures. Do you think we can also get masks like that? They look so mysterious. Jess suddenly changed her focus. Perplexed, James looked back to observe the masks more closely. All of them seemed unique, and there were at least 7 or 8 different masked individuals. The partner was right, the masks had a weird otherworldly charm. Except for one that looked like a demonic grimace. That one made him feel disconcerted and uneasy. In the evening, when the sky slowly started turning red, the final match of the first round ended. This concludes the first round of this part of the tournament, the commenter announced. As the last point of today and as a teaser for tomorrow's spectacle, we ask the participants of the first group to enter the arena for round 2. This was their call. The couple got up to enter the arena.